for July 21. Will you please join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Marilyn, would you call the roll, please?
Bob Karstens.
Here.
Russell Clark.
Here.
Peter Doran.
Here.
Bill Dorier.
Here.
Al Larson is absent. Harry Leapsight.
Here.
Rebecca Cass is absent. Chris Maxbauer.
Here.
Kevin McEllier.
Here.
Dave Taylor.
Here. We have a quorum. Al has indicated to me that he may be late. He's going to try to get here, so he'll take over the meeting once and if he arrives. The first order of business is the first public comment, after which we'll have Mr. Matson's presentation. There being no public comment, I think I will turn it over to Jason to make a special order of business in honor of Jim Matson's 20 years of service.
Absolutely. Jim and Barb, we appreciate you being here, and I'd like the commission to know that Jim has been an employee of Grand Traverse County for 20 years. He's a very dedicated employee. He's our caretaker out at Twin Lakes. Because of the service that Jim and his wife provide, Twin Lakes is one of our most positively commented on parks. We've seen a variety of different improvements out there, and Jim and Barb almost essentially single-handedly, or four-handedly, I suppose, maintain that entire 175-acre complex, including the lodge, the dorms, and it is our second busiest facility. So I'd like Jim to come up. We got a gift for him and a card to commemorate his 20 years.
Most memorable event out there at Twin Lakes, and what was your least desirable event at Twin Lakes?
Well, I guess the swimmers would be the least memorable.
Sure.
And I don't know, I think they're all, our desire is to though have anyone that comes there have a.
Make sure you're getting picked up by the mic there, John.
Okay. Is a great experience out there. That if they, no matter what the size of the group, that they have a pleasurable experience out there, and to really carry on, okay, what Judge Gilbert and all the others have given to keep the camp going, Camp Royale, 4-H, all this, and our desire is just to leave it, I mean, in the shape that they would want it. I mean, to keep, maintain it, and when we're out of there, that somebody to carry on, and that we would have left a legacy for them to follow.
Thank you both for all your service to the county, and there's been a lot of happiness out at Twin Lakes over these last 20 years, and you guys have been responsible for a lot of it, so thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you guys for coming in. Enjoy the rest of the week with your family. Have a good night.
Moving on, we'll go to the consent calendar. We are on the consent calendar. We're being asked to receive and file the Finance Budget Committee report. Is that these revised minutes that we have here too?
If we want to back up, Mr. Chair, I move to amend the agenda.
Support.
Certainly. What would you like to do?
Mr. Chair, I move to amend the agenda so that the corrected minutes that were just handed out of the June 1st Finance Budget Committee, so that they can be properly received and filed.
As a part of the consent calendar?
Received and filed on the consent calendar. That's correct, Mr. Chair.
Okay, great. Okay. Unless there's objection, we'll just do that by consensus. Be part of the consent calendar. Any objection?
Yeah, I have an objection.
Okay. Bill?
This correction was reviewed at the last Finance and Budget Subcommittee meeting. It was voted on, and it was passed 2-1 to have it amended, to have the minutes amended. If you read,
let's
if you read the content of the correction,
Bill, the question here is whether to add it to the consent calendar, and I take it that you probably are against that.
Oh,
so
I'm sorry.
Why don't we add it as items removed from consent calendar under F?
Okay.
That's okay with everybody,
That's
and then we can talk about those revised minutes.
Mr. Vice President?
Yes.
Our bylaws require when we amend the agenda that we have a vote.
Okay, Christine, if you want to vote, have a vote.
I'm sorry, but,
You want to make a motion?
well, Kevin did.
Mr. Chair, again, I
Yes.
made the motion to amend the agenda so that the corrected minutes of the June 1st Finance Budget Committee meeting, so that they can be properly received and filed by the commission.
And I'll
And-
support.
And that is added to under item F.
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Opposed?
Motion passes. Okay, back to the consent calendar. We have the 4 items on the consent calendar: the Finance Budget Committee report, the 211 budget report, the Maple Bay Ad Hoc Committee. There are no communications, right, Jason?
Correct?
And the Park Commission meeting per diem. We're asked to receive and file those. We're asked to approve the minutes of the commission of June 16. Anybody want anything removed from the consent calendar? Christine?
The Parks and Rec, well, I'll just vote no, never mind.
Okay. Anybody want to make a motion to approve the consent calendar?
So moved?
Moved by McCellier, support?
As amended, you mean?
No, it's not been amended. Support by Clark?
Okay.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Motion passes. Okay, let's go down to the revised minutes now, which is part of item F. This is the Finance Budget Committee minutes of June 1. And someone has passed out revisions. I'm not sure who it is.
Mick Elliott passed out
McElliott passed them out?
the revisions.
All right, Kevin, you want to tell us what those revisions are?
Well, I know that Bill pulled this from the consent calendar, so in the absence of his taking the lead, let me add that these minutes were corrected. It was majority ruled that this was necessary in the minutes. My point here is is appropriately,
Can you-
properly,
Can you help me?
is to submit these corrections.
Can you help me? What are the corrections, or what's the difference?
At the page that was handed out, you'll see there's a parentheses at the bottom, and that's the corrections.
So that's an addition
Correct,
to the minutes and not an omission?
correct.
Okay, thank you.
Proper to call them corrections rather than amendments.
And that
So-
indicates that Jones handed out a 5-page packet titled Actual Total Expenditures, Revenues from Fees, and indicated that total expenditures have declined. As a result, from over a year ago, McKellier noted a discrepancy in the actual expenditures, and certain numbers are given here. And Bill, you had a problem with adding that to the minutes?
Yeah, I don't believe that this correction is correct.
Is it inaccurate, or it just didn't happen?
It's numbers that I've never seen before anywhere in any of the budget reviews that we've done. And I question where they came from. I question what it is, why we have a subcommittee member who happens to be a department head submitting corrections to another department head's numbers. I just find that improper, and I'm not sure where they came from. Jason's got some numbers that show expenditures for these particular years that are considerably different.
Well, I think in the decision to approve the minutes, the accuracy or inaccuracy of numbers is not the important thing. The important thing is whether that's what happened at the meeting. And if that happened at the meeting, then and a majority of the committee believes it should that did happen, then they should approve the minutes. Now, have these minutes been approved by
Yes,
these revised minutes?
Yes.
yes.
Okay, all right. Any other comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, if I may.
Kevin?
Yeah, backing, as I was saying, my point is just to properly submit these corrections. I'm confident that they are accurate. They were approved by the majority. I think it's important that the commission is aware of the corrections to properly receive and file. It's my job as secretary to make sure these minutes are recorded
So you are the secretary of the Finance Committee?
of this commission.
Of this commission, right, okay. All right, is there a motion to receive and file?
So moved.
Support.
Okay, is there any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I'm opposed.
Motion carries. Old business, we have the Meyer personal property issue. Jason?
Let me flip to that in my packet. At the June 16th Parks and Rec Commission meeting, I was asked to provide a report and recommendation regarding the personal property at the Meyer property. I've got color photos here. I'll send them down one at a time. I've only printed one set. I didn't want to print several color copies and spend the resources to make 15 copies. If any commissioner would like a copy of those, I'm happy to give them to them. These photos were provided by Commissioner Maxbauer. She asked me to provide those to the commission. The photos, you'll see a variety of debris around the buildings. I wanted to report to this commission that debris was cleaned up on July 8th. Any personal property, I think the second photo, you see a boat located inside one of the barns. That's part of the personal property from Leonard Roush. There was a long-standing unofficial agreement with Leonard Roush that he was able to store personal belongings in those barns. In exchange, he would keep an eye on the property. That unofficial agreement is now over at our request. And on July 13th, Leonard Roush removed a hay wagon, a safe, and a large amount of lumber. All of the items were confirmed by Lou Meyer to be the personal property of Leonard Roush. Additionally, after Mr. Roush's property was removed, the doors were secured by our facilities management department. You can see the first photo that went around, there was a door propped open. Those doors you cannot prop those doors open at this point. Then again on July 13th, I visited the property with Terry Van Doren, our risk management consultant from the Michigan Municipal Risk Management Association. And he and I looked over the property after these items were cleaned up, and he had no major concerns while he was out performing his safety audit. I did get a report from Terry this morning, and I'll have the copy of that for the commissioners later in the meeting. It was suggested there were potential hazardous chemicals on the property. Our facilities management crew is investigating these chemicals and will dispose of them in accordance with the resource recovery department within Grand Traverse County. I also want to let the commission know there are thousands of artifacts within these barns. Commissioners Taylor and Clark were out there on the property. I don't recall the date, June 16th maybe. Looking at the artifacts within these facilities, there are thousands. If the intent of this commission is to make the Meyer property a historical property or some type of agricultural museum, it's going to take days, if not weeks, for someone to go through each of those artifacts to determine whether they're museum quality or not. So basically, it's my recommendation that this commission, it's my recommendation that during our next strategic planning process, the Parks and Recreation Commission provides clear guidance on what they would like to see done with this property. And then once that decision has been made, if the decision is for this to be some type of agriculture or some type of history or some type of museum, that a Parks and Recreation employee or essentially a county employee goes through each of those artifacts. We do not have an outside organization do it or a person outside of the organization because they may not accurately determine what's museum quality and what's not. If we're going to maintain the property out there or the personal property out there of the Meyers, the 2002 auto and equipment appraisal that was done should be redrafted, and a new appraisal should be done because they are missing a car and a few other key items on that appraisal. So that would be my recommendation to the Parks and Recreation Commission as outlined and suggested at our June 16th meeting. I also want to let this commission know that our Facilities Management Department has accepted quotes on trimming the trees back from around the buildings, as well as accepting quotes on the trimming of trees. That will be scheduled through the Facilities Management Department, probably I would guess within the next month. And the broken window at the top of the main barn will be replaced by the facility staff. So it's my recommendation During our next strategic planning process, Parks and Rec Commission evaluates the Meyer property and gives clear direction regarding the long-term plan for the property. At that time, a new assessment of the valuable pieces of personal property should be completed, and an inventory or cleanup of the personal property within the buildings be done that fits the recommendation of the Parks and Recreation Commission in their strategic plan.
Thank you, Jason. Discussion? Dave and Russ, you guys were out there. Do you want to add anything?
Absolutely. This piece of property and the legacy that Mr. Meyer left to Grand Traverse County is a real treasure for historic farm preservation and museum aspects. The quantity of items that we saw is unbelievable.
That's amazing.
And a good share of them. We have harnesses. We have horse-drawn equipment. We have a restored farm tractor. We have numerous pieces of equipment of antique value, from hand kitchen preparation to farm equipment, and far exceeds any list that this commission's ever seen that's on that property. And so I fully endorse that a thorough inventory needs to be done, and this piece of property was Mr. Meyer's vision to become basically a farm museum for educating future generations on what farm life was like in perhaps the 40s. And this proximity to the nature center and the walkability for school groups to tour both the nature center and this farm is a natural. They could come either way. What's going to require this to happen is the creation of a historic friends group like this being discussed with Maple Bay, but this property has everything there already. And it also has the asset of being closer to the community and more accessible to many of our own school-age children in the area for that educational opportunity. One of the other aspects I'd like to add to the recommendation for this property is that occasionally those barn doors should be opened when facilities management is out there mowing the lawn to help air out the barn. If these large structures are constantly enclosed, it creates some issues long-term. And I'm really happy that the trees are going to be trimmed and the windows and the roofs are going to be repaired that are in need to help maintain this property. But we have a treasure here, and I know we're not prepared today to really initiate any program to go forward to create a farm museum of sorts on this property, but we need to make sure that we protect these resources and preserve them for the future so that when the time is right, it can happen and be part of our master plan.
Thanks. Dave, did you have anything you want to add?
I just agree with Russ. There's thousands of items out there, and the only downside out there is when we walk to the back of the property, they've drawn those ponds down, and that's just a pretty ugly sight right now. I'm sure nature will take over and change that
You're talking
in
about
time.
Boardman Pond?
Right.
Yes,
Yes,
yes. Yeah, it looks terrible, but I'm sure things will start to grow and it'll change over time. So, yeah, it's an awesome piece of property.
Thanks. Christine?
Well, first of all, I want to thank County Commissioner Jason Gilman, who went out to the property with me, and several of my fellow county board members. I've been trying to get this property cleaned up for 4 years. And I was the one, I did go in the barn and take pictures. I was concerned especially about the chemicals, the chemical drums. I did not go near the chemical drums, but when I saw them, I recognized them as chemical drums, and with such easy access to the barn, people, and clearly, I mean, a boat suddenly appeared and then suddenly disappeared, and it was just, it was, well, anyway, I just wanted to say thank you to my fellow board members. The other thing that I would like us to put on an agenda, just for discussion purposes, is whether or not the farm area could or should be managed by the Nature Education Reserve. I will tell you all that I had lunch about 2 weeks ago with Commissioner Lemkool, and he suggested that this board take a look at whether or not the Education Reserve could manage this particular property. It really seemed to him, and it seems to me as well that it could be a very good fit. The Nature Education Reserve is right over there. They manage, 3,200 acres of park property, and it really is a natural area. So I would just like us to put it on the agenda for next month for discussion purposes. That's it.
All right. Anybody else have any thoughts on Christine's agenda item?
No.
No?
I have a comment. During the last meeting, when we first started talking about this, I kept having trouble with, there was never any inventory made there that I've seen anywhere. I've asked repeatedly for that, and to date, I have not received one or seen any activity towards that. And here we're trying to determine artifacts and other things that are on the property. I think in all fairness to everybody, that the first thing in place should be an inventory, and then if we have to do it on another meeting or whatever, put that in place, so be it. But that would be the fair way, because I went out there and looked around, and I have no idea whether I was looking at something was supposed to be there or not there or whatever, so.
So Commissioner Leibsight would like an inventory of the materials that are out there, and Commissioner Maxbauer would like this, the NER management of this property to be discussed further at an appropriate meeting or at the next meeting?
At our next meeting.
Next regular meeting?
Sure.
All right, does anybody else want that discussion at the next meeting?
Mr. Chair, yes, I'm in support of that.
Okay, all right. Anybody opposed to that? All right. Bob, you're on the Natural Education Reserve, or the...
Well, I'm not opposed to that, the consideration that the Education Reserve looking over it. I just think that we have a strategic plan.
Yep.
And so our decision on how much time to spend on this, recognizing that this has been a good thing to bring to our attention, in that it kind of some people were talking about selling off a lot of the materials there. When in fact the legacy and the wishes of the Myers didn't really want that to happen, particularly. And so we know now that we've got it prospected on the value and probably a better future for it. But I think how much time we spend on this has to be decided within the context of our strategic plan. And so, to discuss it and have a few things done, but also we have a budget and things like that, and to really assess the value of all of the things and the inventory and stuff like that, that'll take time and money too. And so anyway, I just think that...
So if I understand you right, Bob, you agree with staff's recommendation to put this within the consideration of the strategic plan?
Thank you. You said it beautifully. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Anybody else agree with Bob? Bill?
I agree with Bob. I have another point to make, but
Go ahead.
our director had his hand up first.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jason.
Mine is more of a housekeeping thing. Commissioner Leibsight, where did you request that inventory? Did you request it from Marilyn or I?
No, what I remembered was when I wasn't even aware of the Meyer property. I'm the new boy on the block here. And when that came to me and they started talking about this, what came to mind was, where's an inventory of what this property consisted of? And I asked one or two people if any such a document existed. And I was told no. So what I've been trying to do in the process since then is to get some kind of inventory in place. In other words, we see pictures, we see things, and like I said, I've been out there, I have no idea.
I just wanted to make sure that you weren't requesting that of our office and didn't receive it. We
No,
can send you the
it was
inventory that
nothing
we
like
have.
that at all, Jason.
I'll have Marilyn send it tomorrow.
It was just a thing that come out, it was brand new to me and dumped in my lap, and so logically, I was just trying to follow through with an inventory that would be the logical thing with something brand new.
Okay.
That's all.
Russ, do you want to talk about this in the context of the strategic plan, or do you want to have it on the agenda next time?
I really think the strategic plan, where we have to prioritize, is a better place to have a lot of these detailed discussions, because we have to prioritize a lot of different issues besides just these two topics.
Okay, Dave, how do you feel?
I think I agree with Russ.
Harry?
Yeah.
I'm not opposed to having the discussion. It's a strategic plan.
right.
I just
I would
would
be-
like, I would just like the discussion.
I agree with that. I'd like very much to have the discussion. I think that Harry makes a good point, but to do the inventory, I mean, I've done estates before. I can't tell what's historic quality and what's junk. You know, I'm not qualified to do that. We need, I believe they're called a museum accession expert. I think that the Con Foster Museum can steer us in the correct direction. It's not, whatever the museum is called now. And there are individuals from Michigan State University that I know the city has used in the past at very low or no cost who can look at that and say, this should be in a museum. Second question, what museum? I mean, for us, for the county to bite into the dark hole of museum expenditures would be a very, in my estimation, a very large step. And it may be worth it. Museums are certainly worth it, but whether it's the county function or NER's function or somebody else's function, then that's another question, but we can discuss that within the context. So I guess that there is consensus. We'll just put this on the items to discuss when we have our next strategic plan session. That's okay with everybody?
I just want to offer the opinion. Now I'm thinking, after hearing Bob's analysis, that perhaps rather than waiting until a strategic plan, that if we could discuss whether or not it's appropriate for the Nature Education Reserve to be considered at our next meeting, then we don't have to wait to the strategic plan, and the NER can then run with the inventory structures. I'm wondering if...
Well, we could ask them if they had interest.
Yeah.
I think that's what you're saying. If they have no interest, then we know that. If there
As a
is some interest,
compromise.
then that is one of the many options. I wouldn't be, as a member, prepared to go to any one specific option.
Their focus is nature education and the wildlife more than on historical agriculture. And so, but at the same time, there are natural education aspects to the property.
When's your next meeting, Bob?
It's on the same day as this meeting.
Oh.
And so I'm struggling with, because the meeting starts there at 5:15.
Well, can't you go to both?
I'm not totally schizophrenic yet. If I was, that would make it easier. I'm going to go to their meeting, but I'll probably have to leave early in order to make this one.
Okay, all right. Well, can you see that this,
Yeah.
whether the issue is raised then, whether they're interested in this
But I'll talk
property
with
in the
them,
historic
you
museum?
know, in the next couple of days about
Okay.
this, to the extent that this commission would like that done.
Good, thanks. Christine?
I just wanted to offer that the day that I had lunch with Commissioner Lemkuhl was also the day of the Nature Education Reserve Board meeting. And he said he would bring it up at the board meeting. And then Tuesday, I saw him at the Garfield Township Board meeting. We both represent Garfield Township, or a section of Garfield Township. And he said that the board was receptive, but I certainly would want that confirmed by Commissioner Karstens.
Okay. Well, let's just let the minutes reflect if it's okay. I'm sorry, Bill?
I just wanted to, I agree with the direction that it looks like we're going here, to talk about it strategically, which I think we ought to do with just about everything. But I learned a lot during the process of watching this whole Meyer property thing unfold, and I'm a little alarmed that we got to the point where we were talking about having an auction. And we seem to get these things on our agenda and then just kind of go nuts on it, and without knowing what we're doing. Somewhere in the county, whether it's Parks and Recreation or whether it's just county property, there's got to be a record of what kind of restrictions are on these properties that come into county possession. And there ought to be a way so that elected officials know about it, so the administration knows about it, and so that bodies like this know about it, so that we don't get crazy. Basically what happened was, we had a bunch of people have to come in here and straighten us out. And I think that's a little embarrassing. I think we ought to be a little bit careful.
Hail to the chief. Well, Bill, in response to that, I agree, but I can tell you that even at the city level, I had a tremendous amount of frustration because they couldn't identify where the parks were and what restrictions applied to parks. It seems endemic to local government. Local government doesn't seem to have any kind of good business record-keeping system. They should have a memory, but this kind of stuff happens. Al, you want to take over the meeting here? We are discussing the Meyer personal property, item agenda G1. I am sensing that the consensus is, and if it's okay with everybody, we'll just have the minutes reflect, that the future of the Meyer personal and real property be discussed in the next strategic planning session, at which time we hope to have an inventory and an expert assessment of what out there should be in a museum, what's museum quality, and what out there is surplus and could possibly be disposed of through some other means. Is that everybody's consensus? Or?
Does that follow the director's recommendation?
Yes, I think it does.
Okay.
Does it, Jason?
Yes, it does.
Okay, good.
Okay. And Al, we are on fees, Twin Lakes field and kitchen fees.
Kitchen fees. Oh, this is just a little cleanup here.
Al, would you like me to just start on the top?
Go ahead, yeah, I'm already the list, and I'm still catching up on the
Not a problem.
scrolling here, but I'm already the list.
Since the Parks and Recreation Commission took action on I wanted to give a brief update as well. Since the Parks and Recreation Commission voted to have our fee changes take effect July 1st, we haven't run into any major issues, and I just wanted to let the commission know that. We haven't had a lot of concerns associated with the changes in fees. People have been generally accepting of them, and I think part of the reason is to have that notice, over 30 days notice to let people know those changes were in effect, made for a smooth transition. One of the things that we've run into, and as we continue to work through some of the fees and rental of certain properties, and we could have anticipated this happening, is that there are certain fees that were not discussed during that fee structure discussion that we would like to see updated. So the two items that I have on the agenda today is the Twin Lakes playing field. The playing field at Twin Lakes, we've had quite a few calls about recently, asking to rent that field for exclusive use. Historically, it's been kind of informally managed by a variety of different groups. We've strained that out over the past few years. And we look at that field, that multi-purpose field is very similar to the multi-purpose field that we have at the Civic Center. Typically, the groups that are calling to rent the Twin Lakes playing field are wanting to rent that facility for the same reason that people want to rent the multi-purpose field at the Civic Center for. Typically, it's because of the proximity to whatever group of people that they have a function with. It's of similar quality as the field at the Civic Center, and it's a little bit bigger, but the usable field space is very similar to what we have at the Civic Center. For that reason, it'd be my recommendation that we institute a fee for exclusive use of the the playing field at Twin Lakes for a fee of $60. The second fee that I'd like to discuss is the Twin Lakes dorm kitchen use. Historically, we've charged a $200 deposit, a $100 charge if people are doing light food preparation, or $170 if they are doing full-scale cooking or catering. Obviously, what constitutes light food preparation or what constitutes full-scale cooking it's very subjective. And because of that, I'd like just to clarify this policy and clarify the fee to be a $200 deposit, and then $100 if any utensil in the kitchen's even used. Typically, that would be for prepared foods, so foods that may have been bought at a local grocer or ready-made foods. charge $100 for that, and $200 for food prepared from raw ingredients, which would include fees associated, or which would be the fee if a caterer were to use that facility. And it's my recommendation that we move to that fee structure. I would recommend a motion from the commission to adjust those fees as well, effective immediately.
Commissioner Doran?
What's the duration of the exclusive use of the multi-use field? Is it like 2 hours or all day, or what is it?
We charge $60 for all day at the Civic Center. Typically, when someone rents that field, we haven't seen any users that rent it for more than a couple hours or the duration of whatever game they're playing at that field. Typically, the use at Twin Lakes would be very similar to what we have at the Civic Center.
Well, if you did it a half day, could you maybe rent it twice?
Absolutely.
So, can you establish time limits for what this $60 fee is, Jason?
We could, and I would recommend that if we make it a set amount of time for Twin Lakes, we do this set amount of time for the Civic Center as well. Be my suggestion then that we would do $60 for a 4-hour block of time.
Yeah, I'll move to establish a $60 fee for Twin Lakes multi-use field rental, 4-hour block of time, $200 deposit for the use of the Twin Lakes kitchen, and a $100 fee if there's meal preparation, and a $200 fee at Twin Lakes for groups who use the kitchen to cook from raw ingredients.
I'll support.
All right, moved by Doran, supported by Karstens. I'll not try to repeat all that, but it's essentially what the recommendation of the director was, with the exception of adding 4-hour use time limit to both the Civic Center and the...
The motion only dealt with, I guess, the Twin Lakes, but...
Okay. All right. So, discussion, Commissioner Maxbauer.
Jason, could you please refresh my memory? What do we charge for a ball field?
$33 for a ball field.
Okay.
And that's for a fully prepared field.
Okay.
We have a $27 for a field that's just simply been dragged.
Okay.
And then $13.50 for an unprepared field that essentially just guarantees exclusive use of the field during that specific time.
Thank you.
Commissioner McElligott?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm a little concerned about our fees jumping from 0 to 60. And while I like the consistency between the Civic Center fields and the Twin Lakes fields, I wonder if we're going to lose renters on the Civic Center field because it jumped from $0 free to $60. Can you opine on that?
We've had a $60 fee at you said the Civic Center, correct?
No, at the Twin Lakes field is currently free.
It is free. We haven't had a strong history of people looking for exclusive use of that field. And similar to the way we would have it at the Civic Center, if no one's rented the field for exclusive use, if anyone wants to use it, they're absolutely welcome to use that for free.
For free.
Yep. And so this situation would be if let's say you're coaching a football team and you wanted exclusive use of that field on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday nights out at Twin Lakes from 5 to 9, then we would charge you that $60 fee, and it would give you exclusive use of that, where our staff would say, this field's been rented by someone else.
That's consistent.
Similar to the policy that we have for the pavilion at the Civic Center and the pavilion that we have at Twin Lakes.
Thanks.
Commissioner Leapside, right?
Okay.
Well, my concern has got to be was there any provisions, because there is a Grand Traverse County emergency management plan which include these facilities. And I'm seeing charges, right, there's an
I didn't hear the last
emergency management plan, because I'm with that department over there on the other side of the house, so I know about the plan. And the only thing is it our intent to charge these fees if we declare an emergency or not? Or are we willing to waive these fees in that case? Because once we set the fees and don't establish whether we're going to waive them or not, creates a problem. Because, in other words, like the Civic Center places and places like that out there, depending upon the damage and things in the area, Commissioner Carson, is what I'm talking about.
I might be able to clarify. The way our fee structures are, the way our fee structure is currently, especially for indoor facilities, and this is predominantly for indoor facilities. I don't believe we have any outdoor facilities that have tiers. Tier 1 is governmental bodies, and typically those governmental bodies have free rental to the majority of our facilities.
Okay.
So in the event there was an emergency and there was another government entity that wanted to utilize that for any type of emergency preparedness or any type of emergency situation, typically we would automatically waive that because Tier 1 of our structure typically provides zero cost rental for a government entity.
So if this was something that occurred in Region 7 up here, which is 17 counties, that would still apply then, from what you're telling me then?
It would, I guess it would depend on who made the reservation. You know, if the city police call us and say, hey, Jason, we had a major incident, we need to utilize the ice arena, they would get it at no charge because it's something for the city, for an emergency that happened within the city. Same thing for county, any of the townships within Grand Traverse County.
Well, I guess the concern gets to be that we have problems like, they generally use the scenario of Chicago and people coming north. Well, when we had the big power outage and everything, everybody hustled north. And there was a lot of that kind of thing that occurred. And all I'm looking at here is if we have a fee structure in place, and from what I'm hearing, I guess basically there would not be a charge if the emergency was declared. Would that be correct? I mean, I'm just trying to get it straight in my mind here.
Certainly, I wouldn't expect the Parks and Rec Department to stand in the way of emergency response at any level of government. And so, no, I certainly wouldn't see us charging for responding to real-world events with an invoice for use of our grass fields.
Well, if there's the tier system in place, then when we put these in, we should refer back to the tier system and couple the two facts together if that's the way it works. That's all I'm saying.
Well, the tier system is an umbrella policy for how we set up the fee structures. And then beneath that, we have different fees or some facilities have different fees under the tier structure and some don't, because it just wasn't practical to, for instance, a pavilion. There's not a tier structure on a pavilion. So we didn't follow that through because it didn't work on every single facility that we had. We used it on the facilities at which we see the government using them regularly. The government typically doesn't rent our pavilions. So I feel like the tier structure it's over the entire fee policy, and then we list our individual fees. So I don't feel a need to refer to this because it will be under the same document.
Okay. I guess I just want to make sure that the two are coupled somehow.
Okay. Jason, I have a couple of questions. Philosophically, I would like this board to generally deal with policy and less in the details. Our efforts in the spring on the fee structure was, in my opinion, not to set the individual fees, although that's what we did, but to set a policy by which we set fees. And can you remind me again why, we've had discussions in the past, you and I, about why this body sets fees, and that I remember you being chastised at one point for setting fees without conferring with this body, but I don't remember what the law is on why we do that. Can you assist me with that? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do. I believe it's in our bylaws. I believe it's either in our bylaws or our rules and regulations that the Parks and Recreation Commission sets fees. And I'm
Chris, can you help me with that?
And my memory is not always accurate, but it seems to me, Jason, didn't the Board of Commissioners when we made this more of an authoritative board,
They gave us,
gave us, as a board, that responsibility.
I think so too.
And I think that's why Jason's bringing it forward. I don't believe it's in our bylaws, but I could be wrong. It might be in both.
Within our rules and regulations, and I can certainly take the time, I don't know if taking the time in this meeting's necessary,
No, I don't really,
but I'd be happy to clarify after.
no, I don't need to, I don't need to dive in and solve that exact question. Commissioner Carsons?
No, I think what Chris said is accurate in terms, I'm pretty sure, but I'm not positive either. But I think they did give us that when they made the change.
Yes.
Okay. The second point I'll make, Jason, is in general, at that level, I'm generally happy to let you set the fees for your facilities the way you want to, and I can offer my approval of that as a member of this commission. I wonder if your new system for the kitchen use isn't just as complicated as the old system and doesn't solve your problem of wanting to simplify things. Raw ingredients, I think in the previous discussion that we had, I think we were mostly talking about meat, but of course cutting carrots is raw ingredients as well. I'm a little confused about the fee differences for different levels of use of the kitchen. I know you explained part of that, but I didn't quite grasp it all. When a group uses the kitchen, they either leave it pristine clean or less than pristine, and then cleanup has to be done at some point. One of the things we did, like with the pavilions, was we said, here's the charge for the pavilion, but if you need special work on that, you need us to bring in a whole bunch of other tables, or you need trash service or whatever it was, we just charge our hourly rate for that. And we left it at that rather than trying to make caveats. So what are your thoughts on on my concerns with the fee structure for the kitchen use?
The deposit has historically been adequate. I'm just, with these fees, I'm looking just to clarify essentially those prepared foods and versus raw ingredients, because that's one of the biggest questions we have out there. You know, if we say light food preparation, to one person light is different than another person. The difference in charge would be associated with different use of different utensils. We have mixers, we have several, I think we have convection and conventional ovens out there. We have a very large stovetop, industrial stovetop. So obviously there's gas usage associated depending on the group, variety of knives and whatnot. Some of the stuff is getting old. Being prepared from raw ingredients would indicate a higher level of use of our utensils, of our facilities, as well as typically our plates, silverware, glasses, coffee mugs, etc. Hence the differentiation between prepared foods and raw ingredients. What we've seen out there is organizations that come out with potato salad they bought from Olson's and a variety of prepared items. They typically bring their paper plates and we typically have trash, versus some of our other larger groups will come out and bring a full kitchen staff with them, and they'll prepare 3 square meals a day from scratch out there. And that's really what we've seen from a user standpoint, the difference between the two groups, creating the two different charges.
All right, so $200 deposit for any use of the kitchen, $100 if they're just bringing those prepared foods, $200 if they actually make stuff in the kitchen, if they actually bake and cook and
correct
all that. Okay, I'm satisfied with that. Thanks for indulging that. Any other questions on the policies?
Well,
Commissioner Dorier.
yeah, I want to, I'm intrigued by your initial comment about whether or not we should be reviewing things like that at this level. I agree with you, but I think maybe we ought to empower our director to make decisions like that. I found the provision in the bylaws, it's section 7, subsection 13, where this commission has the authority to charge and collect fees, but we also have the authority to employ personnel to carry out operations of the Parks Department. I think maybe you're onto something there. We tie up a lot of our time at this commission with things that I think we've hired a professional to do, and maybe we ought to let him do it. Do we need some, I intend to support the motion and the fee increase. Do we need to get that on a future agenda, or do we need to just recognize that as we move forward?
I think we could recognize that as we go forward, and I can apply a little more, some more filters on the agenda
Okay.
to avert this. I hadn't thought of the question until I was reviewing it last night.
Well, I appreciate you bringing it up. I think it's real good. I'd like to see us move in that direction.
All right. Harry?
Well, the only thing that I was seeing here where they talked about the kitchen must be returned to original condition upon completion. Well, there's always the item of fair wear and tear. I mean, I run several kitchens for the Salvation Army, and if we go out and do that, we always have fair wear and tear in there, because something might break, something might do something, and it might not be anybody's problem or whatever, so fair wear and tear would be those items, and that could be determined by our executive director or whoever's in charge of that, make a judgment call at that point in time.
All right. Any other discussion then? All right, the motion on the table is to take the director's recommendations for the pricing for Twin Lakes Plainfield and the Twin Lakes dorm kitchen use, with the addition of a 4-hour time period for the field use. Everything else remains as recommended. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
All right, motion carries.
I'd just like to let the commission know, one of the changes that I will be instituting then is the $60 fee for the Civic Center multi-use field. We'll also now have a 4-hour time limit, so it is consistent with the Twin Lakes playing field.
All right, next item is the proposed bylaw change. We discussed this last time. The proposed wording is in the packet. So,
I would move for approval.
Support?
all right, moved by Max Bauer, supported by Doran. Discussion, Commissioner McCallier.
Yes, Mr. Chair, the proposed change in the director's report was considered previously when the commission adopted the bylaws. It was moved at that time. It was reasoned at that time that our meetings were averaging some 3 hours or more in length, and it was a burden to our residents to make them wait until the latter part of the meeting to act on their items of interest. I also suggest the current agenda order works very well for our citizens. The director has always had the ability to opine on items germane to those currently being presented without having to wait to deliver the director's report. So if that's the reasoning for this, I don't see that reasoning, rather than waiting till the latter part of the meeting. So I strongly encourage members to keep the order as is and not support the proposed change of the bylaws.
All right, any other discussion? All right, we'll do this by roll call then. So, Marilyn, please call the roll for the vote.
Bob Karstens,
Yes.
Russell Clark,
Yes.
Peter Doran,
Yes.
Bill Dorrier,
Yes.
Al Larson,
Yes.
Harry Leapsight,
Yes.
Chris Maxbauer,
Yes.
Kevin McCallier,
No.
Dave Taylor,
Yes. Motion carries.
yes.
Next item, preliminary Civic Center Master Plan. Russ?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have provided everybody with an update on the master plan based on the last input that you provided me at a meeting, I think it was 2 months ago, where I did add some notes to the drawing. Specifically, I added a note down at Kids Cove to redevelop play equipment to meet current safety standards, because some of those facilities in there no longer meet current standards for safety. So we should recognize that as one of the goals of the master plan to address. I did remove the bike course concept from the plan that was near the skate park on your previous drawing, and I added the outdoor patio that was discussed at our last meeting adjacent to Easling Pool, mostly on the north side of the building and a little bit on the west side of the building. The area of the maintenance facilities parking lot, we now illustrate as being in the future potential pickleball or tennis courts, which was the historic use of that property was tennis courts. And with the caveat that eventually facilities management is moved out of that area as the main facility, and there's only a partial maintenance capability on property for this specific property versus the whole county. Those were the primary changes that I have made to the master plan, and the rest of the document remains as we've originally indicated. You will see a slight graphic change on the splash pad. We're illustrating it to be a little bit larger, to at least identify the capability that could be something of this size or smaller for the future. The community event sign is identified. We still would recommend that a portion of the fencing be totally removed along Front Street, basically between the wooden building that's identified as a maintenance shed that's left over from the former fairgrounds activity, and going to the west about 880 feet where the grade drops down significantly from the trail, and basically make that more of a landscape edge and create two entry points from the sidewalk into the Civic Center that are a welcoming entry point for the pedestrians. It would require some landscape enhancement to do that. We're still recommending the consideration of, on the perimeter of the balance of Front Street and on Fair Street and a portion of, and all of Titus Street, that the fencing be reduced to 3 feet in height. And I'm recommending it still remain the same fencing, just from a cost standpoint, versus currently about 6 feet tall, recommending it be cut down to be a 3-foot tall fence. Still provides some sense of enclosure, but reduces the visual impact of the current fencing. The other documents that follow this sheet have not changed. It's showing the expansion capability of Easling Pool in a couple directions, a little more of a description on the reduction of the maintenance facility and perhaps expanding of the parking in that area. The next drawing is showing a pedestrian linkage to Garfield Avenue from the Civic Center to create also a drop-off zone. This requires a cooperative effort between the city, the county, and Traverse Bay Area Schools, because it involves all three entities, properties, and real estate. In order to facilitate this sidewalk, it would require relocating the current chain link fence that encloses the playground at Oak Park School. And the final drawing in the package identifies a potential future recreation center should the Oak Park School become available and the stars aligned and the county could acquire some more property. That this could perhaps be a future recreation center for the residents within the city. It would need to be in complement to YMCA facility in the future when the demand is there. This site offers a lot of capability for additional recreation in the community, from seniors to child care. And with the linkage of location adjoining the Civic Center, there are a lot of possibilities. So the master plan, in my opinion, should recommend the consideration of these things to occur, so it's on the back burner there as a thought process. Priorities will establish whether it should happen and when it should happen in the future. That basically is what I'm recommending as far as the graphic portion of the master plan for the Civic Center. We are scheduled for an August 4th public input on this, these recommendations to receive public input on the overall master plan. And then I'm scheduled to attend the August 16th meeting with the Parks and Rec Commission to provide you with the final report that will accompany these graphics. And I'll provide the history, the comments that we've received from the public input, the prioritized list that were generated, and the narrative will accompany the reasoning for the master plan evolving to what it is and the components of it. That will be my final report to the Parks and Rec Commission for this master plan. And I will present that on the 16th.
Commissioner Maxwell.
Russ, I just have a question that just came to mind as I see the drawing. And personally, I have to tell you, relocate facilities management to another property, yay! And I'm sure facilities would cheer that idea as well. But you've got screen maintenance lot.
Right. Essentially, let me explain that. At this point, as an intern step,
Okay, that's all I want to do.
An intern step, we should at least
I just wanted to ask.
screen the parking area on the
Yeah.
chain link fence that's there, and it could be done with vines very inexpensively to offer a reduction of the visual
Oh, yeah.
impact. And that could be removed in the future should you want to bring this back to a recreation facility. But in the intern step, reduce the visual impact.
All right. Thank you.
Commissioner Doria.
I really appreciate the work you've done, and I appreciate the timetable we're on. I think it's great. I just want to point out, I'm sure all of you read the paper and watched TV. There's been a real lesson lately in local government and commissions like ours and in project design with the Traverse City Parks and Recreation Department and the whole issue with their train. Basically, what happened there was we went through a fairly exhaustive process of public input, and somehow, at some point, the train was taken out of the picture, and then the plans were presented, and there was a fair amount of public outcry. I just mentioned that I don't anticipate that with this project, this process. It was a real eye-opener for me to see that, because they tried pretty hard.
Yes, they did. As a professional, that happens very often.
Sure, yeah.
Things get overlooked, and you just have to respond accordingly.
Yeah.
And I did, for the commission's information, I met today with the city planner and the county planner and reviewed these documents with them for their input. And the city planner asked me, would there be a place for the train? I said, I'll bring it up.
A tunnel?
So I know they're trying to work out a resolution to keep it at the Clinch Park location. There are challenges to consider on this property, but challenges can be overcome with proper thought processes. So I guess what I would recommend, if it's with the permission of this commission, is that we could identify it as being a possibility to explore, should it be needed, or want to be considered in the future, but it's truly up to the commission to even address it, in my opinion.
Commissioner Liebzeit.
Oh, no, I didn't have a comment.
Okay. I have a question, a couple of questions, with regard to the public input process. In a perfect world where we're dealing with the public as one entity, and we had the public input session back in March or whenever that was.
That's right.
And they came and they provided a lot of inputs, and a lot of inputs which some are on this plan and some are not on this
Some are
plan.
not, that's correct.
And then in a perfect world, we'd have a second public input session to say, here's our plan, what do you think? And they would make comments on the plan, but what I wouldn't want to have happen is to go right back to March 22nd and have the same group show up and do the same inputs, and we just stay at the same place. Can you describe to me what you would see is how that second public input session works, or what we do with it? How do we manage that? And I don't mean control what they say, I mean keep the scope proper.
Essentially, what we're going to need to do with this is identify where we've come from. We received input. The input gave us these extensive list of ideas. From that list of ideas, certain items were prioritized. Out of the prioritized items, this commission had to go through that painful event one night when we had our commission meeting and tell me yes or no if you want to consider that in the future. The responsibility of what to include and not include in that master plan based on public input lies with this commission. And so we've had to make those tough decisions because we couldn't incorporate everything that was suggested. That's how we have sifted down to what's presented in front of you today. And so the meeting needs to provide that history, identify the structure in which decisions were made, and present the recommendations as they are as of this date. That doesn't mean that this still can't change as a result of this next meeting. You can direct me that we should add or delete according to the input. And any master plan is always a living document. It's never static. It's always going to change.
I've noticed as well, we've all been reading about the train issue, but the splash pad also generates a certain amount of angst in the community. Personally favor a splash pad, but I could see that certainly if both the city and the county put splash pads within a mile and a half of each other, that would probably raise some eyebrows at least, if not keep the letter to the editor column alive and well. What are your political thoughts on that?
In my opinion, the city is a lot further down the road in having a splash pad become a reality than where we are. At this point, it's a dotted line on a drawing and a note. They've gone into some engineering so far and leading towards construction drawings for bidding. That's where they're headed. And so they will most likely have something on the ground long before the county ever would. And so, in my opinion, you will, as a commission in the future, and future commission will have to make a decision. It's on the master plan, but is the need there now? Is it being fulfilled somewhere else? And maybe it'll come off this master plan in the future.
All right, well said. Any other comments or discussion? All right.
We're really lucky to have someone with your talents and skills.
Thank you.
Extremely fortunate. The other thing is, I would think that there's times like, especially when it's hot, when we have all of these, the Cherry Festival and 4th of July and stuff like that, that two splash pads out wouldn't even fill the need. And so,
It's possible.
So, anyway.
That's possible.
Jason?
Russ, I just wanted to clarify, between now and August 4th, would you like any public comment from the Parks and Recreation Commissioners to go to you, or would you like them to come to
Yes,
email
please.
me?
From these documents, as you review them, if you have any comments or things you'd like to have me consider or change before the public input session, please contact me, my office, so we can make those recommendations to these documents.
And then I'd like to remind, or let the commission know that we will be having a public meeting on this on Thursday, August 4th, 6 p.m.
Yes.
6 p.m. at the Civic Center Meeting Room, where we'll solicit additional input from the community specifically on this plan. That conversation will be facilitated by Russ, and then he'll make that presentation on the 16th, the final presentation to this commission.
All right, anything else? All right, next item is a proposed change in the budget report. Jason, you're listed as a key contact, is that accurate?
Actually, I just need to report to the commission that the Finance and Budget Subcommittee met on July 7th and make a recommendation. I'm going to kind of hand it off to Commissioner Dorier at this point.
Yeah, I'll report on that. I'm the chairman of the Budget Subcommittee, Finance and Budget Subcommittee. We've met, I think, a total of 4 times this year. And our charge is twofold. The first was to come up with an improved budget report for this commission to review on a monthly basis. The second charge was to get involved in the budget process. And that was kind of into 2 parts, possibly for 2011 and then certainly for 2012. As you'll remember, Dean Bott came and met with us as a subcommittee. We expressed we had a nice conversation with him. He suggested that he come up with some alternatives for us to consider for budget reports. He came up with 4. We brought them to this commission at our last meeting. The director recommended that we use option 2, and this commission voted to do that. At the very last minute, there was an addition to it. Mr. Doran asked if the subcommittee had made a recommendation, and we had not at that point. So he amended the motion so that it's subject to the approval of the subcommittee. So the subcommittee met, and we were unable to approve, to buy into that option 2. The 2 other members of the subcommittee are Drain Commissioner McCallier and County Commissioner Christine Maxbauer. And I'll let them speak. I'm just the chairman of the subcommittee, so I don't want to try to represent their view. But my understanding was it was a little bit more than this. They wanted to see budget examples 2 and 4 and prior year history. I believe that this is a little bit inaccurate. So I'll let, if you don't mind, I'll let them express, why it is that they feel the way they do. Before we vote, I will be making a motion to implement budget report number 2.
Mr. Maxbauer.
Well, Commissioner Doyer is exactly right. It was not a unanimous vote, and I will tell you that budget report number 2, which this board supported at the last meeting, does not work for me. The reason I voted in favor of Commissioner McKellier's recommendation was I felt it was a fair compromise. I didn't get what I wanted. Commissioner Doyer didn't get what he wanted, and I just felt that it was important to compromise. And so that's why I voted the way I did. Again, I will tell you, and as we get into the next subject of day campers, I will explain why it doesn't work for me. I just think in order to make proper decisions, we need a little more detailed information. But I've been in the minority many times before and probably will be again today. So that's my...
Mr. Chair, as I was asked to opine on this, just briefly, I echo the statements that were just made and would just briefly add. When we first started this process, it was the consensus was to look at past spending patterns, and we somehow got away from that. Now, but the key point is we sped this process up. At our recent meeting, while I felt we got away from not accounting on past spending patterns, the compromise was that I believe when we get into the budget process, we can ask for that the budget committee, when the chair initiates that process, we can look at the past patterns. Secondly, rather than belaboring this and coming up with another whole new form, it was the majority at the meeting felt that there were strong points in report number 2 as well as report number 4 that would be a compromise, just to take both of those and run with it, rather than creating a 5th form and burden anyone with it. So that's my analysis.
Commissioner Carson.
Mr. Doran had his hand up first. I'll follow him, Glenn.
Mr. Doran.
I'm afraid I don't understand. You want both? You want 2 budget reports in the form of 2 and in the form of 4?
That's correct. There were items in report format number 2 that were lacking in number 4 and vice versa. So if you combine them both, you can look at a couple of things and it gives a good snapshot. But the majority felt that just one report was not enough information for you to consider.
Commissioner Carson's.
Not having a lot of professional experience in this area, I went to that class given by North Sky, and on the page where it says preparing for board financial presentations, I put an asterisk by the statement, use summary income and expense categories to enable your board to focus on the big picture rather than managing day-to-day details. Always provide a narrative to accompany the reports. The narrative should reference each report and highlight significant items and variances from plans. And so I didn't see either of those things focused on at all in these products that are supposed to come before us. And so so I'm concerned that those elements and that focus isn't there. It seems to be more in giving us lines of anyway, so I expressed my concern.
Commissioner Doyer.
Yeah, when we started this, looking at these reports, what we were trying to do was to improve on the 17 pages or 20-some pages, however many we get, which is a manually prepared spreadsheet that the staff goes through on a monthly basis, pulling numbers off of the county system. I agree with Mr. Carson's, with Commissioner Carson's, that eventually what we might want to move to is report number 2, I hope, and then in areas where there is deviation from budget, some verbal or written spelled out explanations, that go along with that, in the event that there's large variances. But I really feel strongly that we need to change the report. We need to let the director communicate with us in the way that he feels best, and that we need to let him do his job. The budget process that he is involved in right now, just from the information that I have, it's new. It's pretty wild. Currently, at least the last thing I heard and what you saw come out from Jason this week, is a shift to looking at everything in the county in terms of programs, so that the commissioners can get a feel for what's the most valuable, what's the most meaningful programs, and what maybe is less valuable, and then how much things cost. Jason, can we look at that spreadsheet now?
Sure.
That
Mr.
colorized
Chair,
one?
we're off topic, I believe. That's later on in the agenda.
What's later on in the agenda?
The
Budget
project,
prioritization?
the prioritization you're referring to.
Yeah, that will come up later, but what I'm trying to say is in the budget process, that's his main thrust right now, and that's his assignment. He doesn't work for us. He works for Dennis Saloya, who's the county administrator. And I think we need to recognize that, and I think we need to give him some room within that budget process to do what he can. What we're handing out now, just take one and pass them on, please.
Okay.
Is, it's an analysis that Jason's been working on for the last several weeks. And it shows expenditures, revenues, and then general fund allocation for this department in 2008, 2009, 2010. It also shows a projection for 2011. And it shows the percent change through the years. What it says to me, knowing about the baseball program that got plugged in and then plugged out, and knowing about the addition of a professional to run the pool, to manage the pool, what it says to me is that we're doing a good job of managing expenditures, increasing revenues, and relying less and less on general fund allocation. And we have a tendency, this commission does, of nitpicking and going down into details and looking at budget line items. And I don't think that's our role. I don't think it serves the department well. And I'd like to see us get away from that. I'd like to see this recognized as our performance so far. And hopefully we'll be able to review a 2011 budget that'll have all of the money in it that we need to carry on our programs. Are there any comments on this? I think this is pretty good.
Mr. Maxbauer?
I just have some questions. Is the nature education reserve in these numbers?
The numbers on the table,
Because this doesn't tell me,
the table that states budget history?
yes.
Yeah, it's the only one she's looking at.
Yeah, it does. These figures are inclusive of all expenditures, all revenues associated with Fund 208.
Okay,
Which is Parks and Recreation.
okay. That being the case, we've had, for instance, there's $100,000 in here that was given in 2008 for the Nature Education Reserve building. The county board put a substantial amount of money into a parking lot and some ADA compliant things at Twin Lakes. I'm assuming that's in here. We paved a parking lot out at the soccer fields. I'm assuming that's in here. I don't know because this doesn't tell me anything, but
This tells you the totals for the years involved. So it's not that it doesn't tell you anything.
I'm not saying that this isn't good. I'm just saying that it's
Well, you see,
incomplete in my opinion. Oh, also, as long as I still have the floor, very quickly, the County Board of Commissioners made this body an authoritative body. Now, I will tell you that as an authoritative body, it's my opinion that the county board wants a recommendation, a budgetary recommendation from this board. Now, I sit on the Commission on Aging Board as well, and I will tell you that the Commission on Aging Board met 2 days ago, well, the Finance Committee met 2 days ago, and we received the Commission on Aging Director's proposed budget. And we had that information and we had a discussion on it. I view that as our role, being an authoritative body. If we don't want to have that role, then perhaps we ought to take a look at being an advisory body and set policy as you'd like to do. And believe me, I'm hearing that from county board members.
Commissioner Doran.
Some, not all.
Item, or Format 4 for the budget gives me way too much information and confuses me, and I don't like it. It tells me how much we spent this month in gas, oil, and grease, as opposed to janitorial supplies. I need less detail. I won't pay attention to this if I get bogged down in that level of detail, to be frank with you. So I like item 2, or I don't like 4. 2's fine, and that's the one that I would prefer to have. I haven't analyzed this, but anybody that wants to put numbers down and debate them, I think that can be a healthy exercise, but insofar as what we get every month, I like the format that we've marked out as format number 2.
Commissioner McKelliey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple items. In keeping on topic relative to the budget report, again, I echo, we didn't want to belabor this and come up with a whole new form. Maybe this needs to go back to the committee, because I'm hearing Commissioner Carson's had a valid point that was not considered in the committee meeting. So that's my brief statement on that. Bill Dorrier also asked if we had opinions on the item that was just handed out. Mr. Chair, I'm very concerned. The corrected minutes that I handed out at the beginning of the meeting had expenditures given to us that were inaccurate. We have important decisions to make, and we must have accurate information. These numbers keep changing. The expenditures that were initially reported at our June 1st meeting were different than the expenditures that are reported now, which are the expenditures that I had corrected. But now there's another discrepancy. At June 1st meeting, the revenues from fees are different than the revenues from fees that are being reported now. I'm having a concern about what's accurate. That's my brief opinion on what was handed out.
Jason.
I present information to this commission or any committee of this commission based on what I'm asked for. So while you say there are discrepancies, I'm telling you there's different sources. That's where this information is coming from. What you see here, if you notice at the bottom, it states source for 2008 through 2010 figures, Grand Traverse County combining statements of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance, non-major special revenue funds. This information is taken directly from the annual audit that's performed by an outside agency and overseen or working with our finance department. That's where this information is from. The information that you saw that you've seen in the past was information I was asked. I was asked for some different information that came directly from the AS400 system. So I wouldn't say there are discrepancies. I think the question should be, what is the source of the information this is coming from? In order to provide the most accurate information, I had these figures double-checked by our finance department, and in order to provide the most adequate information for this commission and any committee of it, I followed their suggestion, as we often do in this commission, in following the finance department's suggestions, and utilize the figures from those audits. So at the bottom, you'll see that source. That's exactly where this information's from, and this has been checked by an outside source.
Thanks. Mr. Chair, I'm not concerned about whose fault it is. I'm just concerned that we have accurate information. These revenues are appearing more accurate. I'm pleased to have more accurate information. That's all I bring up.
Commissioner Doran.
Is there a motion on the floor?
No.
And I would move that we ask our budget reports to follow example number 2.
I'll second that.
All right, moved by Doran and seconded by Dwyer, that our budget, our future budget reports follow example number 2. Further discussion? We'll do a roll call vote, please, Marilyn.
Just want to label the roll call so I remember it. Bob Karstens,
Yes.
Russell Clark,
Yes.
Peter Doran,
Yes.
Bill Dwyer,
Yes.
Al Larson,
Yes.
Gary Leapsight,
Yes.
Chris Maxbauer,
No.
Kevin McCallier,
No.
Dave Taylor,
No.
Motion carries. Next item is day campers. Commissioner Maxbauer.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Bear with me while I tell you a very short story. Well, it's not that short, but hang in there with me. I went over to a meeting on June 21st, held over at the Civic Center. When I walked in, and it was a Boardman Dam meeting, when I walked in, all the lights were on in Howe Arena, and the children were seated at tables in a corner. And I pulled my camera out and took a photograph. The reason I took a photograph was because I wanted to photograph all the lights on in Howe Arena. I had a meeting scheduled with the county administrator on the 23rd, and I wanted to ask him if we had the ability to bank the lights, turn them on in sections. And I took a picture, and a young man who I thought was a county employee, he's worked for the county as a lifeguard in the past, looked over at me and said, "You can't take a photograph." And I said, it's a public park, sir. And I turned and I went into about my business. I came out of the ladies' locker room, and I was greeted then by a gentleman who introduced himself as the day camp director and the lifeguard, and the day camp director introduced himself, and he said, "Commissioner Maxbauer, I'm so-and-so," and I said, "Well, hi, I'm Chris," and he said, "I want to know what you were taking pictures of those kids for." And I looked at him and I said, "If you have a problem with what I did, please take it up with the county administrator." And I thought he was a county employee. So I went into the Boardman Dam meeting. I came out about 10 minutes later to buy a soda, and a third person greets me and says, "Maxine, I want to know what you were taking pictures of those kids for." And I looked at him and I said, "What I did was none of your business." And they all knew I was a county commissioner. I mean, I only took one photograph, and so I was going to let it go. The next night I went over there for a sewer and water meeting, and on the window is a sign that looks like it was in crayon saying, "Stop. City, county day campers and parents and guardians only beyond this point. No photographs or video permitted." Now, I know county employees have been told that in public parks, you may take photographs. And so, at that point, I determined Thursday morning I was going to mention it to the county administrator because I wanted to make sure our employees knew photographs are permitted legally in county parks, in public spaces. They are. And so I spoke with the county administrator on Thursday, and he said he would check into this program. Well, in the meantime, I found out that they are city employees, not county employees. And they did take the sign down that said that you can't take photographs or video. In the meantime, I wanted to know how much revenue that we receive from this program. Now that I know it's a city program, I want to know how much revenue we're getting. And the reason I included in your packet Dean Bott's note to me is originally he told me, and he wrote it down, and it's in your packet, that there was no revenue from this program. Subsequently, I found out there is revenue from the program. It's $1,000 approximately for the summer for 8 weeks, and we also receive approximately $800 for 8 weeks of 1 hour for the pool on Friday afternoons. So, I said, is there an agreement, a written contract? No, there isn't. Then I went over to the city, and I said, I'd like to know how much revenue you receive. And I found out that in 2010, the city received $46,872.75 in revenue from this program. In 2009, they received $47,748.50 in revenue. And those are the numbers I wrote in your packet as well. So I brought this forward for a couple of reasons. One is, I think that we need, and you may not agree with me, it's happened several times already this evening, I believe that we as a board need to set a policy on what constitutes when a contract should be in place. I believe when we have someone using Howe Arena for 8 weeks, we ought to have some kind of clear contract. I mean, if something happens to one of those children, you know, I'd like to know that we have a contract that says this is a city program, the city gets sued first and the county gets sued second. I also think we need to address the revenue aspect of it. For instance, I believe last year our electric bill in Howe Arena was approximately $15,000. And I took a look, I had Dean Bott pull 1 month, I think last year during the summer, an electric bill. And Howe Arena is charged in the summertime approximately $1,500 a month for electricity. I just think that we need to, and I will tell you that that other commissioners have now called me and said, okay, what revenues do we get from the farming out at Maple Bay? I contacted Dean Bott and I said, you know, how much revenue do we get from Maple Bay farming? You know, the Sun Brothers, those beautiful flowers, they're absolutely gorgeous. I was told none. And to my knowledge, I don't know yet, I have not heard yet whether there's a contract in place. I just feel that we need more detailed policy guidelines.
Jason?
I'd like to address a few of those comments, I suppose. I'd like to let this commission know that we do not have a formal agreement with the city day camp. We do not have one for a variety of reasons. Historically, this camp was offered jointly by the city and the county, and we've kind of gotten away from that. And it was, when originally created, it was just specifically for children of city and county employees. So historically, we've continued, and the county has operated and managed the program less and less, to the point now where we simply offer the facility. We do not do any oversight or any management of this program. As far as, and frankly, not having a more formal agreement in place has been beneficial to Parks and Recreation, because the city understands that if we have the opportunity to rent the arena, which we have a much higher income for, or much higher revenue, they're willing to work with us and willing to be flexible to move their camp to a different site for that day or that group of days that the facility is being rented. Back in April, this commission did approve a user agreement policy, and this city day camp falls directly within the steward group of that policy. Steward group allows for the director to have approval of this permit, and for the director to work through that process with the city. City of Traverse City has named us as an additional insured, which transfers the primary liability associated with this program and anything that happens at the program to the City of Traverse City. They have an additional $1 million policy that would cover Grand Traverse County in the event something catastrophic happened. The city was sued as well as the county, and the first $1 million would then be covered by the City of Traverse City. This is a very customary thing for us to handle. The city has a variety of waivers, background checks, and tonight is the first time that I've heard that this all started from essentially because Commissioner Max Bauer was taking photos.
One photo.
Or taking a photo. So while I don't agree with it, I find it encouraging that the city staff is proactive enough to react in the event, or that they're active enough to react in the event there's something that's out of the ordinary. We don't have an agreement with them. Could we have a stronger agreement with them? Certainly. But the flexibility that we have currently is very appropriate, and this group does follow the policy that this commission approved back in April. I would be interested in the event that this commission would like agreement, a more formal agreement. I'd be interested to know what points in that agreement the commission would like to see that we don't currently have. That would be a question. The other thing I wanted to address is revenues. And seeing those revenues of, I think, $46,000 and $47,000 in 2010 and 2009, I contacted the City Parks and Recreation Office to find out what exactly their revenues were, because I had a tendency to believe that the revenues being that high were simply gross revenues. The net revenue, and this flyer, or this information coming around right now, the 2000 net revenue for that program was $11,840.24. 2010, that amount was $9,805.16. The other thing that the city does not do, and I'm not here to comment on the financials of the city, they do not allocate any administrative or clerical time for this program. Anytime you do a day camp like this with 50 kids on a daily basis for 8 weeks in the summer is a very time-intensive process for both administration and the clerical staff. There could be another $3,000 to $4,000 allocated specifically to those expenses in 2009 and 2010, which at $3,000 would bring those net revenues down to $8,800 and $6,800 respectively. So I wanted to clarify that revenue thing, or that revenue issue. In the event this commission would like to raise the fee that we offer, which is not a fee that's outlined within our pricing structure, this commission, I'd be more than happy to discuss that. The reason this wasn't an issue, the agreement was in place and Day Camp had already organized this program before the Parks and Recreation put their fees into place, changed the fee structure. So if the commission would like to do that, I'd be happy to discuss that. It was my intent, though, when the city came to us next year, to ask the commission for a special rate of $25 per day, simply because we would have no revenue that day. And in the event we were able to rent the arena for any of those days, we would have the flexibility with the city to move forward. One of the other things that I wanted to bring up is the electrical issue. There is cost associated with the electricity. In the past, when we've had groups like this, we allow them to utilize the facility as they see fit. If the group had all the lights on, maybe they didn't necessarily need them on, but I know throughout the course of the day and the activities that go on in there, they do need all those lights on. They don't need them on all the time, but we typically allow the responsibility of turning on and off lights to our user groups when they're using an interior or an indoor facility. But the electric, I'd like to kind of address that. One of the other things that we put together, and this is more associated with the pool, but it's indicative of the decrease in electrical costs throughout the entire Civic Center. We were budgeted in 2011, and these are numbers I prepared for the pool. I didn't necessarily intend to use them for this discussion. We budgeted $68,000 for pool utilities. We're projected right now, if we maintain the same pace that we have in the first half of the year, we're looking at a $47,000 expenditure, which is roughly $14,000 less than 2010 and almost $20,000 less than 2009 because of changes that facilities management have made to the Civic Center as a whole, both from the electrical perspective as well as the gas usage perspective. So we've seen that cost come down as well. $25 a day more than adequately covers the costs associated with the electric and the water use at the inside Howe Arena. And then the final issue that I wanted to bring up is prioritization. We can put better boilerplate programs or better boilerplate agreements together. That's certain. I guess I'd like to comment on my own prioritization. We haven't had these agreements or more formal agreements in the past, and I'm not saying that doesn't mean they're important. They are. But with the prioritization, my prioritization of day-to-day operations as well as the strategic planning and the budgeting process that have come up since we've been down a full-time staff member, my prioritization has been a little bit skewed, and I did not make it a priority to create boilerplate agreements for organizations that were already had agreements in place or already had made reservations when that policy was put into place. And for that, if my prioritization doesn't match what the commission would like to see, my sincerest apologies.
Commissioner Doran?
Well, so what I hear you saying is that administratively it's working okay, and you think the county's being adequately compensated for the use of the facilities by the city?
Correct.
I would certainly defer to that for the daycare. What about the Maple Bay? Is there no agreement for the use of the Maple Bay property for farming?
There is no formal agreement for the farming of Maple Bay. One of the informality of that agreement does allow the public to go traipsing through the crops out there. The Sen Brothers, they do farm those fields to a very specific criteria. And I'm sure they make money on it. I couldn't tell you how much.
Does somebody monitor that, the Conservancy?
We monitor that. And in fact, just this past summer, I went out there and walked through the entire, well, half of the property. I wasn't able to make it for the second half of the property. Walked through and ensure that the Sen Brothers were farming within very specific, very tight guidelines, frankly, that the USDA put out when we purchased that property through the Wetland Revitalization Program, or Restoration Program, excuse me. But the Sen Brothers are also understanding of people utilizing that facility, people hunting on that facility. Frankly, people could walk right through the middle of their corn or their sunflowers, knock a 8-foot path down, and the Sen Brothers certainly, they wouldn't be able to do anything about it, but they're accepting of that.
But the chemicals and the pesticides or whatever's being used, somebody's monitoring that?
I'm not. I certainly don't have that expertise to monitor the chemicals and things of that nature.
I thought that's what you meant by the limitations. That's what we meant.
Limitations as far as the space that they can farm. That is a very large property, and there are some very unusual spaces that they can and cannot farm that are outlined by some markers that say, you know, this is the WRP border.
I'll let Commissioner Karstens go first.
It's my understanding that they don't pay also because the wildlife they allow, you know, it's there for the wildlife to come. So if the geese come in a big flock and they eat all the crop,
No scarecrows.
too bad.
My apologies, I omitted that portion.
And they do that because that land was preserved with money from various organizations that, such as the Migratory Bird Organization that wanted to preserve land for migratory birds and also for waterfowl and things like that. And so that's why it's a nature preserve as much or more than it's actually a park. And it's also to serve a barrier, so it has twofold things. It provides for wildlife, but also as a buffer to the Tobago area, which provides water filtration for the bay from which Traverse City gets their water. And so the reason why we preserve that area was because of the natural amenities environmental amenities that it provides, primarily rather than to make money or to be a recreational area, but because it's a special place in terms of the wildlife that it provides habitat for. And also then, it's looking ahead and it's preserving this place as a special place.
One of the things I'd like to add when I mentioned restrictions, the Sun Brothers cannot harvest all of their crop, excuse me. There are certain percentages that they have to leave up specifically for migratory bird habitat or for any other ground animals.
Also, when they sought money, because they had to have matching funds to access these funds from larger organizations, they solicited money with the understanding that the people who gave the money, that it was going to be for this type of thing, but not as a place to raise money, but because of the wildlife and natural habitat amenities that it afforded. And to preserve this area, instead of having to tear down a city in order to build a central park, we're going to keep our central parks and the special things that make this place special. So,
Commissioner Dwyer. This all started because some lights were left on. And I've talked to elected officials, the city and the county, and employees of both, and a lot of time was wasted running down the facts and trying to answer these questions. I just wonder what we're doing. I think it's unfortunate that we get bogged down in stuff like this.
Commissioner Liebzeit?
Well, I had a couple of thoughts. I sat on the Rules Committee and everything for the park areas and everything else, and you said that they allow hunting out there on Maple Bay, and there was to be no hunting or firearms on that property. So how did that occur, Jason?
I'm not necessarily prepared to answer that right now. I'd have to check those rules.
Well, that's just a thought. I don't have the rules right in front of me, but that's what I remembered. There was only a very specific place that we mentioned after we went through the whole process. The other thing...
what process? I'm sorry.
If you know what, it took me a second. That was one of the items that we were supposed to address in the park-specific rules that we never completed.
Oh, okay.
That's
so
one of those
we have
issues.
that coming then, evidently down the road. Is that the intent?
It depends on the actions of the Rules Committee.
Okay. The other item that I had was for these areas that we have these casual agreements between executives or whatever and everything else. In the rest of the world I function in, there's always an MOU, a memorandum of understanding. It's just a simple letter or a simple device that says, this is what it is and this is who agreed to it. And this, we're wasting a lot of time talking about these various issues here, and if we had that in place, I feel that that would be a time saver and also clarify the positions and intents of where we want to go.
Okay. Commissioner Maxbauer?
I have one, I didn't mean to necessarily digress into Maple Bay, but I am curious, and if you can't answer this right now, Jason, I don't need an answer, but I would like to know how long they have been farming that property, whenever you get around to it.
I can double check. I believe that's been since 2002 when we purchased the property, but I can clarify that.
And the other thing that concerned me just a little bit was when you said you were glad the city employees were being proactive. They knew who I was. I took one photograph, and suddenly a sign goes up. My concern is members of the public, on Thursday, they were going to Barden's, they were going to the library garden, they were going to the beach, people, these are public spaces, and people take photographs in our parks. Do they understand that this is, that people take photographs in our parks and are permitted to do so?
We've never sat down and discussed whether photos could be taken in the parks, and that's something I'm not prepared to comment on, because I don't know what policies they have within their camp.
No, that's not my question. Do they understand that people may take photographs in our parks? And I did confirm with Mr. Cooney that people may take photographs in our parks.
I'm not denying that people can't.
Can.
I don't know that they know that rule, or whether
Okay.
they don't know that rule,
All right.
although I don't know if their camp has different policies associated with members from the public, and whether that's the jurisdiction of the city, because it's their camp and they're managing it, or whether it's the jurisdiction of the county because it's happening in a county facility, that's something that I'd have to investigate. I can't provide a clear answer on that at this point.
Commissioner McKellar, were you?
Yes, although I was waiting. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Leapsight just basically said a statement that I would echo. I am in support of some kind of formal agreements, whether it be a letter or something that we understand what's going on. I think Commissioner Doran said in the beginning, municipalities have had some loose arrangements, and we've got to tighten these up. So either, so there's something of record with regard to all our facilities, either formally or informally, but something documented. So I'm in support. I think it is our business to be aware of the management of our facilities. And we empower the director to manage those, but we still need to be aware. One final statement, for the director, if you could help me briefly, could you define the stewardship group without having the document in front of me, and why there's not a fee outlined in that structure?
The steward group is not pertinent to the fee structure. That the steward group,
You call it the stewardship group. You said the day campers are part of the stewardship group, and there is no fee structure outlined for that group.
that's correct. I think you may be mixing policies. The user agreement policy dictates what type of agreement would be in place depending on different criteria associated with the group. That's totally separate from our user fee policy, which determines what fees would be charged to each individual group. In the instance of City County Day Camp, they are a steward group because of the way they function, because of how often they rent the facility, the regularity. In fact, I can read it for you right here. The steward group, there are three groups. There's the management group, the steward group, and the individual group. Steward group is designated as a steward group due to their role as being a steward and promoting the positive use of our facilities or parks. These groups would typically work with Parks and Recreation to schedule regular events with maintenance and upkeep of facilities and parks performed by Grand Traverse County. These agreements would typically be one-year agreements or less. The group would have exclusive use of a park or facility during a predetermined set of times, but would not prevent any other user group from utilizing the facility or park during times not scheduled. In most cases, the user groups would have to include Grand Traverse County as an additional insured for $1 million. Agreements at this level would be approved by the Parks and Recreation Director. The agreement group would include YMCA softball, Breakers swim team, and the TBA swimming program. This group would be where tournaments and more complex short-term events would be included, the hunting and fishing shows, the boat shows, softball tournaments, video game parties, and hobby shows, etc. That compared to, and just bear with me, the management group. This group is designated as a management group due to the more robust agreements that typically would be associated with management of an entire park or facility. These agreements would typically, but not exclusively, be longer than 5 years and would allow the group to either have exclusive use or primary use of the facility. In all cases, the user group would have to include Grand Traverse County as an additional insured for $1 million. Agreements at this level would require approval of Parks and Recreation Commission. This agreement group would include T-bays and ice. So that just determines the extent to the agreement we enter into, whether it's a year-to-year basis, whether it's a multi-year term. Then we also have the tiered user fee system. So, for instance, within the steward group, we have the City County Day Camp. We would charge them at the Tier 1 rate, which is the rate associated with government entities. But for the hunting and fishing show, They are a for-profit entity. We would charge them according to the user fees because they'd fall in Tier 4. So while they could be utilizing the same facility, the direction given by the Parks and Recreation Commission is they would understandably charge a government entity like the city less to rent the same facility that they would a for-profit group. So does that clarify your question?
So there is structure, and I see the Tier 1, there actually is structure relative to that stewardship group, depending on where they fall in those tiers.
They're two totally separate.
Yeah, but there's also some overlapping. So you've defined the stewardship, these day campers as a stewardship group utilizing Tier 1 fee schedules.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Commissioner Carstens, you still have a comment?
Whatever it was, I've lost it, I'm sure.
Commissioner Dorier?
Yeah, this day camp provides a very important function to the citizens of the city and the county. And the people that run it, the city recreation department, are important partners of ours. I've worked at 2 camps in my life for a total of 6 years. And I'll tell you what, if somebody walked into an area where I was in charge of a group of campers and started taking pictures and included pictures of them, I think I'd wonder what was going on. I think I'd try to stop it from happening. It sounds to me like this was mostly just a communication problem between Commissioner Max Bauer and some relatively important users of ours who are trying to conduct a program. I'd suggested in the future that rather than handle it like this, that simple questions or even suggestions like this ought to be phoned to the director and tried to resolve at that level, rather than bringing it to this commission, and rather than involving 2 local governments.
I've been permissive on this. We've got about 7 items running around the floor here, or running around the floor, but nothing on the table. Some of this stuff is bigger policy stuff, and some of it is really not. Do we have any motions?
No. We're just talking, I think.
Okay. Commissioner Max Bauer?
The reason I brought this forward is I felt that we needed a policy regarding contracts. That's why I brought this forward. But clearly, if there's no agreement with my opinion, I'll go to the next item.
Do we have a policy for our contracts? They're just totally, we'll clarify that.
Didn't we get all that straight in our fee structure conversations of a few months ago? I thought we divided all of our programs and our user types and figured out who needed a contract, who didn't, and we had a scheme that this falls within, I thought. Am I wrong?
We have a user group contract policy. It appears that the policy that we made is under some question right now, that whether it accurately covers the groups as we intended, or if our policy that we wrote we're not in agreement on what that says. So that's one of the issues running around the floor here. Commissioner McKellion?
No, that was the question I asked.
Okay.
Do we have a policy? I'm hearing you say we do have a policy, but it appears more is the policy being applied correctly.
So a question I would ask Jason, and I understood what you read about stewardship groups and management groups. What I don't understand, for instance, is how the day campers differ from American Legion, and is there a difference between those 2 groups?
That's the way the current structure is set up with American Legion, because we're subsidizing, because the county is subsidizing or giving a different break or a price break to American Legion. We're treating them differently this year. In the future, in 2012, they would fall into that same category as day camp. They would fall into the same category as the YMCA softball program. And they would be a stewardship group at that point as well.
But
Commissioner Carstens?
But would American Legion give up the field if somebody else wants to use it? Or do they have
No.
a contract to have that field, they've reserved it? It seems to me that they're not quite in the same category, because you're saying that this day camp group gives up Howe Arena when someone that you can make money off of wants to use it. So that puts them in a little bit different category, doesn't it?
It theoretically could, and the reason we have that flexibility with the city is because we've had such a long history, long and positive history with day camp, and that's something that, by not having an agreement with them, we have that flexibility to do that. They realize the revenues that we can bring in, and I think they're understanding, because they're another government entity.
But they're a government entity
Correct.
too, and the American Legion is not.
Correct, and we wouldn't ask there have been times that we've asked American Legion to adjust their schedule a bit, and we've especially had to this year. They asked to have some rain-out games on some of the fields that we had already had booked for a softball tournament. So we have asked them to adjust their schedule. The likelihood of us asking American Legion to adjust is much less than asking the day camp to adjust, simply because there are several fields. We only have one arena.
But he did mention policy, and the day camp is a government entity, whereas American Legion isn't, so that's a policy question as well as a management question or whatever. So what's happening to them is governed in some degree by policy. You asked if there's a policy in place. Obviously there is.
There is, but whether or not it's being applied crooked. And I believe we're also being warned we're not speaking in our microphones.
Pardon?
We're being warned we're not speaking in our microphones.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Commissioner Taylor.
I just have a couple comments. As far as the lights go at the Howe Arena, we should know that our costs aren't more than $25 a day. We should know what those costs are, And the property on Maple Bay is that they're farming. Is it possible we're missing out on $50,000 or $100,000 worth of lease so that they can leave up 2 acres of corn for the, I'd like a little more information about what acreage goes for in leases.
Different acreages were bought or preserved from different entities, wildlife entities, and so I don't have the information with me, but there's the DNR, we got money from them. And so whether or not there's hunting on land that the DNR provided funds to preserve is governed in some degree by whether or not the DNR, help, like Yuba Creek they have to allow hunting there. Because most of its preservation was preserved with DNR funding. And so, but people who were asked to provide matching funds, they did so with the understanding that there would be hunting there. And so the same thing goes for a lot of the lands. It's kind of a patchwork, because there were a number of different entities that supported the preservation of Maple Bay. Anyway, we have like a contract with them, and I think also the Grand Traverse Regional Land Conservancy, their legal team is in place to make sure that our agreements with those when we acquired the funds are followed. And so the idea in mind when we preserved Maple Bay wasn't to make it into a money-making place, but to preserve it for its beauty. And
Bob, I agree with what's happening out there, but if somebody's making a lot of money out there farming that property, then
I don't know how much money they're making, but they're taking a risk as well because of the fact that they have to allow, it's not their land, and so, their whole crop could be wiped out if enough birds kind of land there and eat the stuff, or if
any farm would
people.
have that liability. Okay, that's all I have to say.
Jason?
I just wanted to clarify with regards to the policy. I'm reading from our May minutes. Motion by Larson, second by Dorier, that the commission enacts a policy that user groups renting facilities or park space owned by Grand Traverse County will be categorized into management groups, steward groups, and individual groups. Each group will have a common user agreement germane to that particular group. Determination of the group designation is left to the Parks and Recreation Director. Motion by Dorier, second by Carstens, to amend the motion, add or other groups as determined by the Parks and Recreation Director. Vote for the amendment of the motion was unanimous, and vote for enacting the policy with the amendment was, scroll down. Vote for enacting the policy with the amendment. Motion by Larson, second by Dorier, that the commission enacts a policy that user groups renting facilities or park space owned by Grand Traverse County will be categorized into management groups, steward groups, individual groups, or other groups as determined by the Grand Parks and Recreation Director. Each group will have a common user agreement germane to that particular group. Determination of the group designation is left to the Parks and Recreation Director. Result, motion carried unanimously. So we do have a user agreement in place. Now I'm looking at the policy that was created from that you can find that we utilize. So it's up to me, according to that policy, to determine whether or not the city is part of the steward group. The group, and this is the definition of the steward group, the group is designated as a steward group due to their role as being a steward and promoting positive use of facilities and parks. They do promote use of a variety of our parks. These groups would typically work with Parks and Recreation to schedule regular events with maintenance and upkeep of facilities and parks performed at Grand Traverse County. That exists. That happens in their with their organization, their program. These agreements would typically be one-year agreements or less. We're talking 3 months. This group would have exclusive use of a park or facility during a predetermined set of times, but would not prevent any other user groups from utilizing the facility or park during times not scheduled. In your packet, you have the permit from 2010, which is a finished permit. You also have the permit for 2011, which is the one we're working through right now, showing that there are predetermined set of times or dates. In most cases, the user group would have to include Grand Traverse County as an additional insured. We are named additional insured. Agreements at this level would be approved by the Parks and Recreation Director. So, Parks and Recreation Commission in May approved that policy. I just read directly from the policy that we utilize and have evidence in this packet that we're following that policy appropriately. So I just wanted to make that clarification.
Commissioner Dorier?
Yeah, I wanted to respond to Commissioner Taylor's question. I think it's a really good question. Is there an opportunity there? But it goes back to it's like the Meyer property all over again. I mean, here we could sit here and say, yeah, let's look into this, and the next thing you know, we're lucky we got Commissioner Carstens here telling us what the score was. Somebody in this county ought to have a folder for each property that has all the documents in it that relate to that property, and maybe even a summary of what we can do and what we can't do. And I don't think that's a Parks and Recreation function. I think it's maybe a function of administration, but that needs to be done. That's, with all the people coming and going on these commissions, and even changing staff periodically, there's some information that could be lost. The Meyer example is a really good example. We had citizens come in here and basically straighten us out, show us documents that had been exchanged during the exchange of that property that we ought to have had and ought to have been aware of. This sounds like the same deal.
Commissioner McKellian?
Briefly, a statement and a question, I echo that. You're right. And I think it is this commission's responsibility to come up with that folder that documents all that. And then a brief question. Jason, I'm confident that there is a policy in place. Are the Tier 1 fees being charged? It appears they are. Stewardship group, you've made that executive decision. Are they being charged the Tier 1 fees?
No, they're not. And as I stated in my report, my verbal report that I gave, they had their agreement in place, as we've done historically, before that policy went into place, so I thought it appropriate to honor that agreement. I also stated in my verbal report, and I think it's in my written report, that I would come to the Parks and Recreation Commission next year at this time and ask for a special consideration for the city day camp to pay the same fee, $25 per day, next year because it's just an added revenue that we otherwise would see zero revenue for. So no, we're not. To answer your question, no, we're not.
And maybe in that folder, we can discover if there's other groups that have some historical arrangements that finally need to be updated. So,
Commissioner Clark?
Yes, I guess I would just like to speak up that there is a master plan for Maple Bay that outlines all this. It's in place. Everybody should have a copy. If they don't, get a copy. It's another one of those plans that we spent $12,000 creating, going through a lot of public input, dealing with all the numerous governmental agencies' restrictions. They're identified. The agricultural component is a necessity to maintain the character of the land and fulfill the obligations with the various funding sources. It's identified in that master plan.
And whose master plan is that?
That's Grand Traverse County Parks and Recreation Master Plan for Maple Bay.
yep.
All right. Anyone else? Commissioner Leapside?
Well, I got one quick comment. I guess I'm sort of stumbling over some of the stuff. Since I used to sit on the Light and Power Board here and everything else, that I realize how the fee structures go for a large commercial building like where we have the arena and the pool. And one of those things that we're not looking at is a thing called demand. And people are charged demand. If you demand a kilowatt of energy for a period of time, and I think it's 15 minutes if my memory serves me correct, you will take and pay that whether you use anything beyond that or not. It's just a flat fee. And always when I see numbers and things that come out, we talk about it, they only talk about the actual usage fee of what goes beyond that, how long that you actually use that for how many hours and things like that. But you always pay this other fee right up front. So I did some rough numbers for that building and things, and quite surprisingly, it was pretty close to about $100 a month if we just left the lights on 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's just an assumption I made, because I'm a master electrician and all the rest of this, and I can do that stuff. I got out computerized stuff to do that. And I was quite surprised. I said, well, I was over there one day, a couple of days, and nobody was in there, and all the lights are going all day long, and I said to myself, well, can't somebody just turn them off, for God's sakes, you know? I don't know quite what the answer is, but when I read here the reports that they couldn't really pull us out, I can understand why they are saying that. I'm just saying I know roughly what the numbers are, and that's a considerable piece of money, because if that's true, that's roughly close to $1,000 a year. And that would probably help our budget situation from where I'm sitting. I don't have anything further on it, it's just my thought I'm plugging in there.
Okay. Summer restricted hours.
Well, thank you. Actually, in my email to Jason, the subject was supposed to be summer restricted pool hours. But the only reason I bring this up is, and I just wanted the board to be aware, I've received some calls saying I thought that and first of all, I want to be absolutely clear that I do still personally support summer restricted pool hours. I know the board voted otherwise. But I have received some complaints from constituents who have questioned me and said, I thought you weren't, as a board, going to restrict summer pool hours and you're closed Saturday and Sunday. And we have not always been closed on Saturday and Sunday. So I just wanted to let the board know that I've received some questions and complaints, that's all.
Jason?
I guess my comment is more for the public then that may be watching. Just wanted to give some history. 2011, we've not been open on Saturday or Sundays. We were not open on Saturdays or Sundays in the summer in 2010. In 2009, we were open for a Saturday morning lap swim, early Saturday morning. We were closed Sunday. In 2008, we were open for an early Saturday morning lap swim, and we were closed on Sunday. And then in 2007, we were not open on Saturday, we were not open on Sunday. So just to clarify for any public that may be watching in regards to Commissioner Max Bauer's comment, there's the history. In the event that someone sees the pool open on a Saturday, or saw the pool open on a Saturday in the summer, in previous years, it may have been for a specific user group that called and said we'd like to rent the pool for a variety of hours. we were able to find staffing, and then that user group rented that pool. But that's the history of our restricted summer hours within Eastlink Pool since 2007.
All right. Free to public pool hours, Commissioner Max Bauer.
Yes. I bring this up regularly, and I thought I'd try one more time. Everybody in Grand Traverse County pays for Eastlink Pool. Not everybody in Grand Traverse County gets to use Eastlink Pool. And I truly believe that and the only time that pool in my memory has ever been open free to the public was when my husband came up with the idea over spring break after the economy initially collapsed. The recession started. And, and he said, Chris, people can't afford spring vacations, why don't you just open up the pool to the public? I went to the county administrator who thought it was a wonderful idea, and we did it for a week. But what I'm suggesting to this board is that we ask that public pool be open several times a year, free to Grand Traverse County residents who all pay for that facility. For instance, Memorial Weekend, I think, would be a really good weekend. Historically, and this is just a suggestion, and the board doesn't have to agree with me on this either, but Memorial Weekend, historically, swim classes are over. It's a 3-day weekend. The water's too cold to swim in out in the lakes and in the bay. My husband and I go, and we have basically the pool to ourselves because the classes are canceled. People don't realize that there's so much room, and I just think it would be. I just think it would be beneficial not only to the Parks and Rec Department, but to members of the public if I don't care if it's twice a year, 3 times a year, 4 times a year, if we opened that pool to all the residents who pay for it. So I would make a motion, I'm going to try it, I would make a motion that we ask our Parks Director for a recommendation regarding opening Eastlink Pool to Grand Traverse County residents at no charge several times a year.
Mr. Chair, I support the motion. And comment that I see the justification in it. The county taxpayers do pay a portion of it. And also, it's a good marketing tool. I think if we have an opportunity for people to get and see the pool, maybe they'll buy a membership. I'm looking forward to the director's recommendation about any problems this may cause.
All right, the motion on the table is to ask the Park and Rec Director for recommendation regarding opening Eastlink Pool to Grand Traverse County residents several times a year. Moved by Max Bauer, seconded by McKellier. Discussion. Jason?
One of the things, I guess it's entirely up to this commission if they would like to have us be open several days out of the year, but just keep in mind that I entirely agree with Commissioner Max Bauer's statement that everyone in the county pays for the pool, but not everybody in the county can afford to swim in the pool. I guess what I would like to say in response to the spring break where we allowed people to swim in the pool for free, that was done partially, and it's been a while so I don't recall entirely, that was done partially as a marketing tool. And what we did is we required the students to take a swim test, and then we took their information, their phone number, mailing address, and email address, so we could promote and know which swimming class they would be placed into if they took our swim lessons. So part of the reason that we did that, and I don't recall if it was a greater portion for marketing reasons or for simply a free swimming day or a free swim in the pool, but that's part of the reason that we did that before. It wasn't just a carte blanche, the pool's open today for swimmers. If the commission would like to see us do that, I just feel it's my obligation to tell the commission that we will lose money and we will lose a greater amount of money in the pool on those days which is something that this commission has been questioning and how to increase revenues. And that's a question that we get from the County Board of Commissioners all the time. So if the commission would like that, the only recommendation I would have is if the commission wants to see that happen, that they let me know how many times several is.
Mr. Maxbauer?
Well, my motion was asking the director for a recommendation. And I'm glad you mentioned the swim class thing because, again, that was my husband's idea. So, and I thought it was excellent.
Commissioner Doran?
I wouldn't be opposed to asking Jason whether there should be free opportunities, and if so, when and under what circumstances, and the marketing and the economic implications. I won't support the motion to direct him to provide, to establish some free days. I don't think it's good boardsmanship not to have information in our packets, direction from our staff on these items. I would prefer not to see items on our agenda, Mr. President. As a board member, I would prefer not to see items on our agenda unless there was a firm recommendation or some options, so we had some direction, so this wasn't just a pleasant conversation among people interested in recreation. This was trying to get some work done for Grand Traverse County Recreation. So I don't think we have anything on this item or the several other items here in our packets, and I would not support the motion, but I would, well, I said what I would do.
All right, anyone else?
I just want to voice support for Commissioner Doran's position. I think it's fine for us to ask Jason to consider the concept, and if he so chooses to get back to us with a report, otherwise, move on.
My opinion is that the motion does allow that leeway. It asks him for a recommendation regarding it, and it would be within his purview to come back with a recommendation that we shouldn't do this.
I'd rather not ask, this is a minor point and a fine point. I'd rather not ask him for a recommendation. I'd ask him just to consider this concept in the pool program overall. And if he considers it, finds it a valuable concept, then it's his business to get back to us.
All right. Did you want to amend the motion?
I'd suggest that. For me to vote for it, yes. I need to amend the motion that way, if that makes a difference.
Mr.
I'd just say that the idea, I think it's a good idea on face value, but I think to make a big decision, I think for him to think about it, and for all of us to think about it, would be a good thing. But the concept is good. And so, but I agree with Mr. Doran and Mr. Dorier as well, so just to say that.
All right. Further discussion or amendments?
But I'm proposing an amendment.
Okay, what's your amendment?
The amendment is to modify Commissioner Maxbauer's motion, and the wording would be to ask the director to consider the concept of free pool days in the overall pool program.
Support.
Mr. Chair, I don't see much of a difference, but can we have the full amended motion restated?
Yes, the amendment that's up for consideration is, would be to replace the words "for recommendation regarding," to replace them with "to consider the concept of," which would make the motion read, "Ask the Parks Director to consider the concept of opening Easeling Pool to Grand Traverse County residents several times a year." Any discussion on the amendment? All right, so then the vote will be whether we're going to amend the original recommendation. We're not voting for the motion, we're simply voting whether we want to amend it. So all in favor of amending the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
All right, motion carries. So now the motion on the table is to ask the Parks Director to consider the concept of opening Easeling Pool to Grand Traverse County residents several times a year. Any further discussion on that? Jason?
Can you reread that from Maryland?
Yes, the amended motion?
Yes, please.
The amended motion is to ask the Parks Director to consider the concept
of opening Easling Pool to Grand Traverse County residents several times a year.
Thank you.
All right, any further discussion?
The only discussion, it appears the only difference is the director has a choice whether or not he comes back with a recommendation. That's the difference in the amended motion, so, good.
Okay, Jason?
I have maybe more of a philosophical question. I don't know that it requires an answer, but a few minutes ago, we talked about user fees, and it was the Parks and Recreation Commission kind of said that it was up to the director to determine fees. So I appreciate the direction in saying, Jason, it's okay for you to adjust the fees down to 0 for several times per year to allow more people access to the pool. But I'm curious if the commission, in stating that earlier with the user fees, whether this motion is necessary.
Commissioner McKelvey?
Thanks. I'll just briefly state, as elected officials, we've been asked by our constituents to consider this option. We're just representing the needs of the citizens.
All right, further discussion? All right, anybody need me to read that motion yet again? All right, all in favor of the amended motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion carries. Mr. Chairman, I have to excuse myself. I have to leave town.
All right, Commissioner Clark.
Thank you.
Gotta get out of town.
Excuse me, we voted on the amended motion, and then we voted again on...
We voted to amend the motion.
Right.
To change the words, and then we voted on the motion.
As amended?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, cool.
It's amended,
Yes.
right.
Thank you.
All right, next item is membership renewals. Commissioner Maxbauer.
Yes. Do we send invoices out?
When we have proper staffing to send invoices out, we do.
Okay.
We haven't had proper staffing. That was a function that played to the strengths.
I just needed a yes or no. I'm sorry, I interrupted. I apologize.
When that was something that played to the strengths of a former employee, and when we can come back to full staffing, that's something that we would like to see introduced again.
All right, program prioritization report.
There we go.
Commissioners, last week you know that I sent a request to have each of you prioritize the park programs as I presented them to the to the County Board of Commissioners. This exercise was actually was directed by consensus of the Budget and Finance Committee based on a recommendation by Dean Bott to have the Parks and Recreation Commission go through this process. So what I did is I took each of your individual prioritizations. I entered them into a database, into a spreadsheet, and took the average ranking of each of those responses. We had, and I took it for 6 of the 9 commissioners that were available to respond. Most of you, if not all of you, saw the email from Commissioner Maxbauer bowing out of this because of her role with the Board of Commissioners, and I appreciate you doing that, Commissioner Maxbauer. So the way it boiled down, you have the prioritization in front of you. We had 6 respondents out of the 9 total, and you see the average of each of those individual programs as presented. And then the far right column shows the ranking associated with each of the different programs as presented in the packet that I sent each of you. And maybe it's appropriate while you're looking over this, just to kind of give a rundown for the community who may be watching at home. Civic Center received the highest priority. Easling Pool is 2nd, Howe Arena 3rd, Twin Lakes 4th, Parks and Recreation Commission 5th, the Nature Education Reserve 6th, Keystone Soccer Complex 7th, Power Island 8th, Maple Bay 9th, Vasa Trailhead 10th, Meyer Property 11th, Beitner Park 12th, Medalley Park 13th, and then there was a three-way tie for the 14th through 16th spot with the Bunker Hill and Bartlett Road properties, the Burnley Road property, and the Whitewater property.
All right, Jason, so as I understand it then, the process that this is a part of was to provide our priorities, our prioritization to the Board of Commissioners. And so if I were on the Board of Commissioners, which I am not, I would say that the Parks Commission has said that if we are going to have to cut their budget, that I should start at the bottom of that list and work my way up until I find an adequate, an appropriate, whatever the right word is, appropriate amount of cuts to make my budget work as a county. And so I believe I know this answer, but if I were to start from the bottom of this and work my way up, where's the first place I would find budget to cut?
You would find budget to cut at Power Island. As a,
Very little.
I agree, your statement is correct. The Parks, or the County Board of Commissioners were given these 16 programs, as well as every other program that's administered by any department within Grand Traverse County for their prioritization. So while our Parks and Rec Commission just prioritized these 16, there were over 200, Commissioner Max Bauer, ballpark?
We did not prioritize those down to that detail, Jason. The only thing we did, the part, for instance, and I wish I had it with me, but I don't, I'm sorry. Under Parks and Rec, we only had 3 items.
So you guys prioritized the abbreviated version versus the
Yes,
entire version?
thank you,
And
yes.
I'm curious, because I know these were turned in, some of them were turned in last night, but I know some county commissioners hadn't turned them in yet.
Only 3 commissioners had turned them in, Commissioner Thomas, Commissioner Henschel, and Commissioner Gilman.
And as I stated in the cover sheet for this exercise, this process is new and very dynamic. So some of the stuff that I'm hearing tonight, this is even new to me because the County Board of Commissioners addressed this last night. So I'm curious, Commissioner Max Bauer, do you know, and I understand if you don't, whether or not every county commissioner ranked just the abbreviated version, or
Yes.
if there were some that
Yes,
that
we only
the full
ranked the
version?
abbreviated version. The full version was just as backup information for us.
Commissioner Dorier.
Yeah, I think this is a really valuable exercise. I can see what the Board of Commissioners is trying to do, and that's good. This is our opportunity, I believe, to communicate with them. I would suggest that the President draft a letter to the Board of Commissioners explaining what we went through here, and that this is our rankings. And then as the budget gets finalized, that maybe that letter should go on to explain, to maybe quote some of these historical numbers that came out tonight. Explain that we've been trying, as a department and as a commission, we've been trying to cut back on expenditures, increase our revenues. We've made some significant progress. That these programs are important to us, and that we would hope that they would be able to fund our budget. That's just my suggestion. We, our role, their role, the whole thing really isn't really all that clear. There's not, in their process, there is not a carved-out step to come ask the Parks Commission, what do you guys want to do? So I'm just suggesting that maybe we be a little bit proactive and communicate with them, just get our opinion in front of them.
Commissioner McKelvey?
Great, thank you. Members of the commission, I'm a little concerned that these programs, these 16 properties are really not programs. And I think that's already evidenced, and Jason had said that his 16 programs were edited down to 3. it would be helpful to share those, in my opinion, to share those documents with the commission members on what you had submitted and what it got edited down, and maybe even look at the other departments and the instruction sheet about how to create programs. And just as Commissioner Dorier just mentioned, this is a fluid process, and I believe we may get a reprieve to revisit some of these programs. I know you shared some concern at the recent budget meeting that these 16 properties got edited down to 3 programs. I believe there may be more programs that maybe weren't included once you accurately consider the definition of a program. So if the Board of Commissioners are budgeting based on programs versus you're trying to budget based on properties, I think we've got a disconnect.
There very well could be a disconnect. In my conversations with Dean Bott and Dennis Aloya and talking through the sheet that was handed to every other department, they understand that our department is different than the rest because we don't necessarily offer the typical programs. They both suggested to me and agreed with my analysis of the sheets that or the instruction sheets, that it was appropriate for us to, or for me to list each of our individual parks and the Parks and Recreation Commission as programs. So the information that was sent to you guys, or that was sent to you, is the same information that I sent on to the County Board of Commissioners. So the rest of the commission knows, the county administration office received over 200 individual programs, and they created an abbreviated version, I guess, maybe an abridged version is a better way to say it, where they categorized all of those individual programs into a conglomerate of programs, if you will. And I'm happy to provide that information, I don't have it with me, to the commission. But it was my discussions with Dean Bott and Dennis realizing that Parks and Recreation it's kind of a square peg for a round hole in this budgeting process with what's defined, what we have as defined, or what programs we have as defined by the instruction sheet that was put out by the Board of Commissioners.
Do you remember the 3 programs in the abbreviated version that ended up? I think one was facilities.
I don't recall what they were, no.
Are they a subset of these? I mean, can you take these and put them into 3? Or is it?
3, no, it's 3 totally different things. I think.
Okay, and that change was made by the administration?
Correct.
Okay.
Commissioner Max Bauer.
I wanted to just briefly describe what we were doing at the county board level. We were given information as to what are mandated programs. For instance, the drain commissioner is mandated. And it was a wonderful piece of educational material that we all looked at and said, you know, every new commissioner that sits on the county board should have this information. And what we did is we were limited. 3 was the most important, 2s were middle of the road, and 1s were on the low end of the scale. We did it the opposite way because we are adding points. And we were limited, we were only allowed 40 3s, 40 2s, and 40 1s, not more than. Up to, but not more than. And I have no, and these points are going to be added up and going to be presented to the county board, and we're going to take a look at the bottom, at the 1s. Obviously, we can't eliminate mandated programs, but we might be able to modify them, et cetera, et cetera. And the cuts are going to, what we're talking about doing, the cuts are going to start in the 1s.
Commissioner Carstens.
Just, it looks like there were only 6 respondents
That's correct.
out of
9.
Out of 9, I see. So if you had received 9, would it, chances are, or what are the chances that this would have been possibly different?
Hard to tell.
It's,
It'd be hard to tell, wouldn't it?
it's very hard to tell, although you can see if there is consistency on certain programs, you can see it, and that's part of the reason I showed each individual respondent.
okay.
And frankly, I can't even tell you which is which. But that was part of the reason I identified it that way.
So is there any flaw in this because 3 responses are not here, or doesn't matter?
3
What-
people chose not to respond, that's a response.
I see.
Yeah, I didn't respond because I could do the Civic Center number 1, and then I didn't know what to do.
I kind
I
of
was-
I can sympathize with
and
that
it was-
reaction, because mine was
And
that
it was
initial.
it was just so arbitrary, and it was like throwing a dart, at the wall, and I just started to doubt the whole process as to, exactly what we were doing, so I just didn't respond. And I'd be happy to go along with, the tallies. I mean, I'm not objecting to the tallies. I can't say that I would be any different.
All right, maybe this is connected, maybe the connection is too tenuous. I do feel strongly that the charter of the Budget Subcommittee was, as Commissioner Dorrier said, twofold. One was to hash out a reporting system, and the other was to involve the commission, the Park and Rec Commission's vision with the budget, so that those two things were at least starting to have a conversation. I'm not going to go so far as to say in our first try that that the budget would be an expression of our vision. We have a long way to go on actually stating what our vision is, but to begin a process to include our inputs so that the budget reflected that. Well, I recognize that a number of things have come up, including Commissioner Joseph's resignation, including the 2011 budget crisis, and a new budget process from the Board of Commissioners. I still feel that that's an important thing for us to do as the policy-making board for the department. I feel that the reason why I feel these are connected is because these are some stated priorities from this commission, and that then should translate in some way into our budget recommendations to the county. I don't think that this is the full discussion beginning, middle, and end. I feel that this is an input to it, or a data point even. And so is it possible, Commissioner Dorrier, that the subcommittee could still try to make progress towards that objective of what the charter of the subcommittee was?
Anything's possible, Mr. President. It's my perception, and you don't have to share this, but it's my perception that this process of putting a budget together in this county in this year is moving really quickly at some times and really slowly at other times. I think there's a lot of people looking at each other to try to figure out what needs to happen next. I'm not, I'm pretty sure the Board of Commissioners is not waiting for us for what our opinion is. So I thought it would just be appropriate for us to take this information here that shows, and again, I didn't like this list either, but what else do you got? It has changed between when this went out and today, and now they're down to 3. We're not even sure what the 3 are. We can't keep up with the way things are changing. I'll go back to my suggestion that we, either you or we or something, we communicate with the Board of Commissioners in writing that we have a budget. Jason's working on the budget with Dennis and with Dean. I'm not sure where they are in the actual input. I don't know if they have what they want to call a final budget. But once that's done, I think we need to speak up and show them a little bit of track history here and ask for funding of the budget that we put forth.
I agree with a lot of, I'm sorry.
What is it that you're looking for from the Finance Committee? What is it that you would envision we would do?
What I envision is I say this, then I don't want it to be taken out of context, so I'll try to provide the full context in 45 seconds or less. There's the practical part of the budget process, and then there's the philosophical part of the budget process. And I'm not trying to operate in the ivory tower at all times, but we are a policy-making board, and I do believe that if once we get our policy laid out, then all the rest of the stuff just falls into place, because now you know who you're doing, what you're doing, to whom and why and when, and then the consistency flows through the entire Parks and Rec system. So while I agree that I think that your idea for a letter expressing what our priorities are will be somewhat useful to the Board of Commissioners, though perhaps not effective. I also think that the other part of that, of us sitting down, just like the Civic Center Master Plan, we're not going to execute this plan this year, guaranteed. We're probably going to execute none of this Civic Center Master Plan this year, but this is what we as a commission are saying, or will say when we finalize the process of what we want, what we think the Civic Center should be. In the same way that a budget should probably say, this is what we think the Park and Rec Department should be. And for instance, if it were a one-man commission, I would say we need we need to add a position for programs to run things that the community lacks and the community needs, which can also help us generate revenue to help us subsidize other programs so that we can come closer to breaking even. That would be mine. Or we need to increase our advertising budget by a factor of 10 so that we can get the word out, and we can do things like free pool days with it in fact having a positive impact on revenue and not a negative impact. And those are the types of philosophies that I have, that I would love to see go into a budget that then will maybe slashed and cut and ignored, as a way for this board to come to consensus, if such a thing can happen, on what is it we're really trying to do, what would our program be, and if we can only choose one thing out of that budget that we really, really want, what would it be? And what would we be willing to sacrifice out of that budget to get those things that we really care about? Way over 45 seconds, I'm sorry, but that's what I think the value of the process is. If we don't make it by the time that the budget is published, that wouldn't really even bother me too much if we were able to have a meaningful conversation that led to consensus on the direction that we're going. That's the number one thing I think we lack as a commission is vector. Where are we going?
I'm not sure how to respond. I don't see any room in this. I also, I've got some concerns, frankly, about the makeup of our Finance and Budget Committee. Drain Commissioner McCallier is in competition with Director Jones for the same pot of money. And there is a shortfall.
Commissioner McCallier?
Yes, thank you. I don't understand why this has gotten personal. I disagree with that opinion. But I also have concern that the chair of that committee never wanted the committee in the first place. It seems like a conflict of interest. Nonetheless, I'm prepared to work through it and focus on principles rather than personalities.
I think maybe at this time it'd be appropriate for me to resign as a chairman and member of the Finance Committee.
I hope he doesn't. I think he brings a lot of wisdom to that effort and a perspective that's really valuable, and so I hope you don't do that.
Well, at our last meeting, I really couldn't control the agenda. There's a majority that's already got kind of a predetermined idea what they want to do, and I don't support that.
There's only one item on the agenda. Anyway, the rest of my case.
All right. I can live with that as the end of a discussion. We can talk later about your last statement. All right. Is the next item on the agenda the director's report?
It is. It is. Chair, I must excuse myself. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm going to start off with some bad news. Unfortunately, I have to report to the commission that last night at Twin Lakes, about in the 5 o'clock hour, there was a drowning at Twin Lakes. A young man, late teens, passed away. Some friends of his pulled him out, put him on the beach, and the Long Lake first responders responded, did CPR and administered the AED on the beach. Worked on the young man for 10 to 15 minutes, and he was alive when they loaded him into the ambulance, and they took him to the hospital, and unfortunately he passed away at the hospital. That's all that I'm really prepared to say about that at this point, other than to offer our condolences to the family, and we're sorry to see such a tragic incident occur at any of our facilities. So I wanted to let the commission know that, and I'll keep this commission updated as things progress. So, first item on my director's report, which we've kind of discussed to some degree, is just talking about the budget process. And this is very date intensive, so I don't like doing this, but I'm just going to read through what I have in my report. Budget process kicked off on June 15th with an informative meeting led by Dennis Aloya, County Administrator, and Larry Inman, BOC Chair. Direction provided to each department head was to build a list of programs that their department managed and submit to the BOC via the County Administration Office by June 29th. So there's only a 14-day window there. By July 5th, we were asked to submit our line item budget to the Finance Department. Each Board of Commissioner member received a list of the programs that were compiled from department heads on July 6th and was asked to prioritize them by last night, July 20th. They were also asked to provide suggestions for decreased expenditures and increased revenues. The intent of prioritizing the programs was to consider what programs would be cut in an effort to shore up the budget shortfall. On July 29th, as I mentioned, this is a very fluid process. The prioritizations and suggestions of the BOC will be reviewed with the staff. Through early August, the Board of Commissioners will also electronically poll the community to determine what the public sees as their priorities. After this information is taken into consideration, the process will continue through early fall with adoption of the budget occurring in October. And this is some of my commentary, more of my report, I suppose. Board of Commissioners' new approach of budgeting unintentionally, and I can't stress that enough, I don't think they would have intended to do this, unintentionally makes it more challenging for a board such as Parks and Rec Commission to provide timely input. While the Board of Commissioners is working on its program priorities, it would be beneficial for our commission to prioritize the programs that I've outlined that we've already discussed. As this dynamic and untested process continues to unfold, the Parks and Rec Commission will be involved further to discuss additional details and provide input for the 2012 budget. Finance Department is also willing to provide additional support as well as latitude in finalizing our budget figures in an effort to include input from the Parks and Recreation Commission. With our board being what it is, this process does make it a little more challenging for me to work through the Finance Committee to get input, then work through the Parks and Recreation Commission to get input. And I did discuss that with Dean Bott when this budget process began, and Dean did provide some suggestions, prioritization activity being one of them. And he has stated there is some leeway for the Parks and Recreation Commission to have additional time to make input on the budget process. I will continue working with Al and moving forward to determine the best way to solicit the Parks and Recreation Commission's input on our budget, realizing it is important. One of the things that I would like to say in regards to the Finance Committee being provided with a specific mission, I think that mission was provided with the intent that the Board of Commissioners was going to follow a similar budgeting process to previous years. The budgeting process this year is a little bit different, and it does make it more of a challenge for the Finance Committee. So attached in your packet is the budget timeline suggested by the Board of Commissioners. One thing I do want to key in on is the survey that's gone out to the public. There's an electronic survey through SurveyMonkey, and that website is www.surveymonkey.com/s/BOC budget survey.
Say that slower. Or it's provided here, right?
No, I'll give it to you after the meeting.
Okay.
But that is open to anyone in the public to fill out in regards to the services that the county provides. Interestingly enough, the second question asks the public to prioritize a variety of different services that the county offers. And I believe that our department is the only one singled out with its own category. They ask specifically what the prioritization is of parks and recreation services. The rest of the departments within the county, they kind of group together, they loosely group together. So it'll be interesting to see the results of the survey and to see how the Board of Commissioners utilizes that public input in determining their budget for 2012. Next item is the strategic plan work plan. To date, strategic priorities 1D, 2C, 1D and 2C have been completed. The information gathered through the needs assessment is going to be beneficial to a variety of other priorities that you see on the work plan, which is the very last page of the packet. One of the things that I would like to state is the safety audit for each park has been completed. Last week, I met with Terry Van Doren, who was out at who came up here, and he and I toured each of our parks. This morning, I received his report. This is something that I'd like to discuss with the commission more in depth, so this will be on our August agenda. But I did want to pass the report out to each of you. As I said, I received it today, so I was unable to prepare anything more for the packet this month. Overall,
Jason?
Sure.
Could you provide that to us via email as well as a hard copy so that I just have a record in mind?
What I'll have to do is, I didn't receive it via email, I'll have to scan it in, and I can get it to you.
Whenever, but
Sure.
thank you.
Sure. One of the things that I did want to bring up, I've been I haven't been able to spend as much time on the strategic plan for a variety of different reasons. One of the key reasons being the loss of our aquatic manager. I'm excited to say that Kim started Monday of last week for half days and was released to work full-time with restrictions to just desk work as of today. So next month you'll see Kim here at this meeting, and hopefully she'll be back in the groove. So, community collaboration project, I just wanted to update the commission with the survey will be completed on July 31st, and I hope, I'm not sure of the timeline at this point, but I hope that I can give some preliminary information from the needs assessment to this commission in August. Project list, DNR document, it's similar to what I've stated in the past, and our show lease amendments. They were sent to Bob Cooney several months ago asking for his review and comments. I know that's a lengthy project, and it's not exactly the highest on Bob's priority list, understandably because of his duties to the remainder of the county. One of the things that I did want to point out, you'll notice throughout the packet, references to what each item in the packet, how that relates to our strategic plan. One of the things I'd like to see is I'd like to see our commission work more in line with the strategic plan. It's one of the reasons that we invested the time to create the plan and to give me some prioritization in moving forward and making progress within our department. So in the future, you're going to see additional references to what each item is referring to within our strategic plan. So, are there any questions about my report?
I have a question about, under your matrix that shows scheduled timeline and actual timeline.
Correct.
The very bottom left corner of that document talks about trends and opportunities. One of the very last statement, the fourth bullet in that says, information in the expired DNR plan is accurate and up to date. Can you elaborate on what that means exactly?
It means the DNR plan is expired, but there hasn't been major changes to the information contained within that master plan that would make anything out of that. There isn't a tremendous amount in there that needs to be updated, let's put it that way. The information in there is relatively unchanged from the last master plan, but the last master plan has simply expired.
right.
Mr. President,
Yes, I'm sorry.
I just have a process question here. Looking at our agenda for tonight, is the director's report in the proper place, in the new revised place, or is it still where it used to be?
It was still where it used to be because when we made the agenda, it wasn't, we hadn't changed the bylaws yet.
Okay. All right.
My intention, had I been here on time, was to move the director's report forward, but
I didn't mean to make you point that out. Just a comment I want to make is we sat here from 6 o'clock all the way till about 10 minutes to 9, and we found out that we had a fatality at one of our locations. I have a great desire in seeing this thing, and seeing their director's report, and that type of information move to the front of our meeting, and some of these other miscellaneous items come towards the end.
understood. All right, second public comment. There's no public to comment. Notices and commissioner comments. Commissioner Max Bauer.
I waited purposely to mention this at the end, and I only mentioned it because Commissioner Lemkool mentioned it publicly at a board meeting. We have been receiving some complaints about drinking parties at Twin Lakes. And so I wanted to let the Parks Board know that this was mentioned at a county board meeting. Also, I have a request for Jason. We have not had, over the last several months, performance measures. I understand, you've been short-staffed. When the performance measures are brought back into the packet, could we please have the missing months that we have not had? And let's see, I went out to the Conservation District and asked for, I was there to be educated, and while I was there, I asked for facility rental rates, and this is on your desk. It's just for information purposes only. The reason I thought it was interesting was, they do have a kitchen, and these are their fees for their kitchen, and I know we talked about Twin Lakes earlier. And let's see, I have here, and this is, I handed this out at the Commission on Aging, and I want to hand it out to you as well, so all board members have this. These are the Grand Traverse County Board of Commissioners policies and procedures for application, appointment, and conduct of citizen appointments to boards and committees. And the primary reason I'm handing this out is annually we have Open Meetings Act training, and the Board of Commissioners earlier this year passed a resolution in effect requiring all board members during their term to take at least one Open Meetings Act FOIA-type training class. I know the terms are 3 years, so, and again, Mr. Cooney usually puts the course on, and he usually does it annually, and I just wanted to let everybody know, so I will pass this out for you. And the other thing I have is, I know we discussed fees earlier. Jason, this is just a request from you. When you do change fees, if you change them without board approval, if you would please let me know. If there's one thing the county board does not like, it's to find out from clients or customers or the public that fees have been changed that they know nothing about. So if when you do that, if you could just please include it in our packet so that I can make sure the county board is aware. That's it.
Jason?
Commissioner Matzbauer, we'll do our best to accommodate the missing performance measures. I'm not sure that we'll be able to provide all of the information based on the way our registration software works, which is where we derive the majority of that data. We'll provide it if we can. I'm not sure that we'll be able to, though, so I just wanted to let you know that beforehand.
All right, did Commissioner Clark speak with you, Jason, about speaking on his behalf or anything at the close of the meeting?
No, he didn't. I think that's something he wants to bring up next month.
All right, Commissioner Karstens?
Can you appoint members to the Finance Committee or the Budget Committee?
Well, I can, subject to the approval of the commission. So it's not as easy as me just going, you. It isn't like that. It would be an agenda item, we would discuss it and vote.
Anyway, what is the desired number that you want? Is 3 sufficient? If you want another member, I would be willing to join that Budget Committee, Mr. Droyer, if it would mean Mr. Droyer would remain. He has lots of experience that I don't. At least I have a perspective. Sorry, I should be speaking into this. Did you hear what I said?
I did.
Okay. But then I thought I should make this before they're gone, being as, we would need the approval of the commission, I think, if you were to enlarge the number of members to that committee. Excuse me.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? All right, I entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Dorn, supported by Taylor. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned.